Chapter 22-27. In the blink of an eye, more than a month had passed. Among the 9 superbs, Lin Shun stood outside a canyon, the little fat cat lying on his shoulder, its 2 eyes staring straight at Nye Tian, as if it was waiting for something. Fat, why hasn't big bro Nye Tian done anything yet? Lin Shun looked at Nye Tian, his eyes glittering like black gems. By this point, he had fully absorbed the power of the demon lotus heart, opened the 9 nascent god seal, and awoke his nascent spirit. His aura was several times stronger than before, and even his body had become much taller and stronger. Lin Shun was very worried about Nye Tian, and his little face was scrunched up in anxiety. "It's been almost 40 days, Fat Cat said, frowning. Nye Tian absorbed the power of the demon lotus 9-fold flames 10 days ago. He should have reached the paramount god level by now. Why hasn't he done anything yet?" But right now, Nye Tian was completely focused on his cultivation and couldn't be disturbed. Fat Cat had no choice but to wait patiently. Then, another 5 days passed. It had been a full month and a half since Nye Tian had started absorbing the demon lotus 9-fold flames. But Nye Tian was still sitting there in the valley, as still as a log. Only his breathing was steady and steady, indicating that he was still alive. This can't go on. What's going on inside Nye Tian? Fat Cat was getting impatient, and her deep blue eyes were glittering. If Nye Tian continued to be so quiet, something really might happen. Fat Cat couldn't figure out what was going on inside Nye Tian that was keeping him from reaching the paramount god level. "Lil Fatty, look!" At this moment, Lin Shun suddenly shouted. He seemed to have discovered something and was very excited. Little Fat Cat froze for a moment. Its eyes locked onto Nye Tian, but it did not discover anything. It could not help but ask, "What's wrong? Didn't you see? Big brother Nye Tian's body is glowing." Lin Shun's eyes twinkled with joy. Fat Cat's eyes narrowed slightly as she stared closely at Nye Tian. Finally, she noticed that there was a faint layer of light circulating around the latter's body. This layer of light was very weak. It seemed to be tightly attached to Nye Tian's body, almost fusing with his body. Lin Shun's perceptive ability was very strong. This was the talent of a martial artist who had 9 elements in one. Even the Fat Cat could not compare. "Fatty, what kind of power is this? It's so terrifying." Lin Shun could feel the layer of light around Nye Tian's body. It was extremely terrifying, and he couldn't help but ask, "This is..." Fat Cat paused for a second and then realized something. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak. "Fat, what's wrong?" Seeing Fat Cat suddenly stiffen, Lin Shun couldn't help but frown and ask. But Fat Cat didn't seem to hear Lin Shun's words. She shook her head in horror and said repeatedly, "This is impossible. This is impossible. This is impossible." "Fat, what's wrong with you? Are you okay?" Lin Shun's little face was full of fear, and he asked anxiously, "Holy light. This is definitely holy light. How can there be holy light on Nye Tian's body?" Fat Cat's face was dull, and she was completely scared out of her wits. She was very sure that the layer of light surging around Nye Tian's body at this moment was holy light. Holy light was a unique light that could only be released by martial artists when they became saints. But Nye Tian, at this time, was only breaking through to the paramount god realm. How could there be holy light outside of his body? What on earth was happening inside his body? At the same time that Fat Cat was shocked, inside the star domain of the Starstones, Nye Tian's consciousness was standing tall, looking up at the stars above his head. His expression was one of utter shock and astonishment. His stupefied expression lasted for a few dozen seconds before he finally returned to normal. He was currently in the 8th layer of the Star River. In the center of the 8th layer of the Star River stood a floating giant made of light and shadow. This giant's body was so huge that it occupied an entire layer of the Milky Way. Nye Tian simply couldn't estimate the size of the giant in front of him. He only knew that he could sense the boundless power of the stars from the glowing giant, as if the glowing giant had gathered the power of 800 billion stars in its body. Nietion didn't even know when the giant had appeared in the 8th layer of the Star River. Although he had awakened the power of 800 billion stars when he became an overgod, nothing had appeared in the 8th layer of the Star River. Who are you? Nietion forced himself to calm down and muster the courage to ask. He could sense that the giant wasn't lifeless. It had its own consciousness. Little guy, I have waited for nearly 1,000,000 years. You're finally here. The giant's voice boomed like thunder, as if it came from space itself. It caused the entire Star River to shake. You're... Nietion's eyes trembled. He suddenly thought of a name and exclaimed, You're the Starry Sky Saint. Nietion had heard of the Starry Sky Saint before. Back when he was cultivating the Starry Sky ancient martial technique, a voice rang out in the Star River and told him that the Starry Sky ancient martial technique was created by the Starry Sky Saint. Nietion still remembered the name. He speculated that the Starry Sky Saint was the creator of the Star Stones, or the owner of the Star Stones in the past. Now that he had encountered a giant with its own consciousness in the Star River, he naturally thought of the Starry Sky Saint. The Starry Sky Saint. The giant smiled when it heard the name. It didn't nod or shake its head. Instead, it said, Little guy, are you ready? Ready? Ready for what? Nietion was stunned. He couldn't help but frown. He didn't understand what the giant was talking about. Ready to receive the saint's soul. With a laugh, the starlight giant's body shuddered violently, and in the next moment, it morphed into countless beams of starlight that shot towards Nietion. Before Nietion could react, he was enveloped by the endless starlight. In the next moment, he felt as if he had become a bottomless pit that was absorbing the starlight. The starlight around him kept surging into his body. What's going on? Nietion screamed. He felt as if his body didn't belong to him anymore. He couldn't even feel his own existence. Little guy, this saint's soul is a great gift. You must make good use of it. At that moment, the giant's voice rang out and disappeared into the void. At the same time, outside the canyon, Fat Cat and Lin Shun were completely stunned. Chapter 22-28. Fat Cat was completely stunned by the scene in front of him. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. He had never thought that such a scene would happen. Then, in the blink of an eye, the starlight giant's body covered the entire Nine Extremities world. The Nine Extremities world was filled with the mysterious power of the stars. What kind of power is this? It's amazing. Lin Shin's perception was unique. He felt that the power of the stars was extremely powerful, but very gentle. He couldn't help but exclaim. However, in the next moment, the starlight giant in the air directly dissipated and disappeared in an instant. Fat Cat and Lin Shun were stunned. It was as if the scene just now was just an illusion and had never happened. Just at this moment, Nietion cried out in alarm. His figure moved, and he abruptly stood up, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare. Nietion, brother Nietion. Fat Cat and Lin Shun saw Nietion stand up and shouted almost at the same time. Then they directly stepped into the canyon and came to Nietion's side. Nietion's eyes were trembling. He looked very shocked, as if he was trying hard to remember something. Nietion, are you okay? Fat Cat saw Nietion's absent-minded look and waved his two paws in front of the ladder and asked tentatively. It was only then that Nietion finally came to his senses. His originally cloudy eyes instantly brightened. His pair of eyes were clear and bright like the stars. Nietion, what happened? Fat Cat saw that Nietion had recovered and asked anxiously. Nietion let out a deep breath and explained everything that had happened in the Starry River, not leaving out a single detail. He didn't understand what happened and hoped that Fat Cat could give him an explanation. The soul of a saint. When the Fat Cat heard Nietion say these 4 words, it couldn't help but be stunned. Its fat face froze in place, and it couldn't speak for a long time. Fat, what exactly is a saint's soul? Nietion asked anxiously. He didn't know much about sages, so of course he didn't know what a sage's soul was. The soul of a saint is the remnant soul left behind by a saint after his death. The Fat Cat took a long time to react and explained, just like the bones of saints, they're the bones of saints after they died. The remnant soul of a sage. When Yetion heard this, his eyes narrowed and his heart was filled with shock. He could not imagine how powerful the remnant soul of a sage was. At this moment, he suddenly thought of what the Starlight Giant had said before it disappeared. "Little guy, this wisp of the sage's soul is a great gift. You must make good use of it." What did that mean? Could it be that the sage's soul from the eighth heaven had fused with him? Heavens, I've fused with the soul of a saint. Yetion swallowed a mouthful of saliva and let out a strange cry. His whole body froze. The fat cat also came to his senses, and his eyes widened as he turned to stone. Only Lin Shen looked at Yetion and the little fat cat with a confused expression. He had no idea what was going on. Considering his current level of knowledge, he didn't understand what it meant to be a sage's soul, so he wasn't surprised. "What do you feel right now, Yetion?" After a moment, the fat cat calmed down a bit and looked over at Yetion. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, he froze in place. To his surprise, Yetion had already reached the early paramount god level. Yetion stared in shock for a moment, then looked inside himself, only to find that he too was frozen in place. The man and the cat were petrified for a few more seconds before they reacted. I'm a paramount god?" Yetion said in shock. Even as he examined his own aura, he still wasn't completely convinced. Moments ago, he hadn't felt anything at all, and yet he had somehow broken through to the paramount god level. If anyone else had seen what was happening, their eyes would have popped out of their sockets. Countless martial artists poured their blood, sweat, and tears into breaking through to the paramount god level. But Yetion had somehow managed to break through without even realizing it. "Feel your own aura, Yetion," the fat cat said excitedly. Yetion nodded repeatedly, then trembled as his sword energy surged up into the sky. In the blink of an eye, Yetion was like an enormous sword that towered over heaven and earth, incomparably fierce and sharp. So powerful, Yetion couldn't help but exclaim. So powerful. He could clearly sense that his aura was several times stronger than it had been before. His battle prowess had definitely improved by leaps and bounds. "It really is strong." Little fat cat finally reacted, its eyes trembling, and it was even happier than Yetion. Becoming a paramount god was exactly what Yetion had been aiming for. Now that he had finally become a paramount god, how could he not be happy? The difference between peak overgod and early paramount god might seem like only one minor level, but the gap between them was like the difference between heaven and earth. Yetion was confident that, given his current strength and the power of his 3 forbidden magics, he would be able to fight an expert like Shenli head-on. However, he was more interested in the soul of the sacred saint. What did the soul of a sage mean to him? What kind of changes had occurred to him now that he had fused with the soul of a sage? In fact, he still didn't know where the soul of a sage had come from. He couldn't be sure if the soul of a sage was the discarnate soul of the Starry Sky Paragon Sage. When he asked the Starry Sky Giant, the latter didn't answer him. No wonder my body was shrouded in a layer of holy light just now. So it was the soul of that saint. Little Fat Cat suddenly understood and exclaimed in realization. He knew that no matter how freakish Yetion was, he couldn't release holy light while trying to break through to the paramount god realm. Without a doubt, the layer of holy light didn't come from Yetion, but from the soul of a sage in the 8th heaven of the galaxy. The Fat Cat was also very interested in the soul of a sage. He looked at Yetion with shining eyes and asked, "Yetion, can you still feel the soul of a sage?" Yetion's eyes flickered. He took a deep breath and began to sense his body, trying to find the soul of a sage. However, what surprised him was that after carefully sensing his entire body, he did not find any aura of the saint's soul. His martial body and soul hadn't changed at all, except that they were stronger than before. The soul of a sage disappeared. The Fat Cat couldn't sense the aura of a sage's soul in Yetion either. He couldn't help but frown. But the next moment, he seemed to think of something. His expression changed, and he exclaimed, "Could it be that the soul of a sage is hiding in your body, waiting for an opportunity to take over your body. Chapter 22-29. Lin Shin, what happened? Seeing Lin Shin's small face suddenly turn pale, Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but narrow as he asked in a surprised voice. Little fella, what did you sense? Little Fat Cat was taken aback as well, asking in shock. He was worried that the soul of the sage had not merged with Nie Tian's body, but was lurking in his body, waiting for an opportunity to take over his body. This kind of thing was not rare. Many experts would leave behind a remnant of their soul after they died, waiting for other martial artists to come and use their remnant soul to take over their body and be reborn. Just like Di Shirtan, who had wanted to take over Nie Tian's body, but Nie Tian was a fiend god embryo, and Di Shirtan was inexplicably trapped in the fiend god embryo. However, the situation now was completely different. Nie Tian had encountered the soul of a sage. The soul of a sage, even if it was just a remnant soul, contained unimaginable power. Fat Cat knew that Lin Shin was a martial artist with 9 elements in one, and his perception was stronger than his. At this moment, what exactly did Lin Shin feel? He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Right at this moment, Nie Tian also suddenly felt something, and his expression couldn't help but change. He was quite surprised. Boom! In the next moment, black runes began to gush out of his body, and instantly enveloped his entire body. Forbidden runes. Fat Cat frowned when he saw the black runes, and his expression changed as he exclaimed. It seemed that the forbidden runes in Nie Tian's body had suddenly gone out of control. What's going on? Nie Tian shouted. He wanted to control the forbidden runes, but he could not do so at all. Then, Nie Tian felt a strange force break out of his body. It was invisible and boundless, as if an invisible hand was gently caressing the forbidden runes around his body. In the next moment, he was shocked to find that the power of the forbidden runes had weakened a lot. That strange power seemed to be purifying the power of the runes. This is... Fat Cat sensed something and was surprised. After a while, she shouted, Holy Qi. He did not see the holy Qi, but he could clearly feel its presence. It was the holy aura that was purifying the runes of the forbidden technique. Then, the runes surrounding Nie Tian's body suddenly became violent and then rushed back into his body. Everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. What happened just now? Nie Tian stood rooted to the ground and only spoke after a long while. Although it happened to him, he had no idea what was going on. Nie Tian, how do you feel now? Fat Cat was very calm, and there seemed to be a smile on her face as she asked. Nie Tian took a deep breath and sensed his own aura. He looked very surprised and said, My strength seems to have increased a lot. Indeed, his current strength had increased significantly compared to before. In fact, he could even sense that he was on the verge of breaking through to the mid-paramount god level. It was a very strange scene. After all, he had only just broken through to the early paramount god level. Normally speaking, even if he practiced cultivation nonstop, it would take years for him to achieve another breakthrough. But now, Nie Tian could sense that he was bursting with power, and that he was on the verge of another breakthrough. Excellent, Fat Cat said with a smile. It seems my guess was correct. Seeing how mysterious Fat Cat was, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown and ask, What did you figure out, Fat? Nie Tian, Fat Cat said with a faint smile, looking very confident. I think the soul of that sage has completely fused with you, and is now circulating through your entire body. Saint Chi? Nie Tian was taken aback, a confused look on his face. He had never heard of sage energy, nor did he know what it was. If the soul of that sage had fused with him and become sage energy, then why had the talismans inside of him suddenly gone out of control? Apparently, Fat Cat could sense the confusion on Nie Tian's face. Chuckling, she continued, Sage energy is a very basic type of sagely power. Some of the more powerful pseudo-sages can use it. Pseudo-sages? Nie Tian said, clearly taken aback. This was a name he had never heard of before. Fat Cat waved a paw, but didn't elaborate. You don't need to know too much right now. All you need to know is that sage energy isn't a threat to you at all. In fact, it will be of great benefit to you. Eventually, when you reach the peak paramount god level and try to break through to the sage level, you'll realize how important sage energy is. The reason why you lost control of the Forbidden Technique rune just now was because this Saint Aura sensed that the Forbidden Technique rune was harmful to your martial body. Therefore, the Sage Aura directly purified the Forbidden Technique runes, allowing a portion of the Forbidden Technique runes to transform into the power within your body. The reason why your strength has increased is because of the talisman's power. Now, you can sense that the level of the talismans has decreased. Nietion's eyes flickered when he heard Fat Cat's words. Then he sensed his body and was stunned. He sensed that the level of the talismans had indeed decreased. Previously, the talismans had been at the mid-mystic level, but now they were at the high mystic level. It had almost decreased by a whole level. I understand now, Fat. At that moment, Nietion finally figured it out and said with an excited expression, "The reason why my strength has improved again is because of the power of those runes. The sage energy thinks that the talismans are harmful to my martial body. So, I want to purify the talismans and turn them into my own power. Am I right?" Fat Cat nodded. "That's right. Actually, I've known for a long time that the three great talismans aren't good things. Although they don't affect you much right now, they're a huge burden on your martial body. If it weren't for the talismans, you could have broken through to the paramount god level long ago. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way to get rid of the talismans, so I haven't said anything. But now, with the sage energy, the talismans inside of you will be gone in no time. Furthermore, the next time the sage energy purifies the talismans, you'll definitely be able to break through to the mid-police god level." Nietion nodded vigorously, looking very happy. He knew that the three great talismans weren't good things, and the mysterious person had warned him to use them as little as possible. But each time, his opponents had been too strong, and he'd been forced to use them. Now that he had the Saint Chi, he would be able to understand the forbidden runes perfectly. Furthermore, he could use the power of the talismans to break through to the next level. The soul of a sage could transform into the sage energy and purify the talismans. Chapter 2230. The level of the Forbidden Art rune dropped from Mystic Mid to Yellow High. This wasn't too bad for Nietion. He could use the three Forbidden Arts to increase his strength to the late-stage Paramount God level, and his battle prowess would definitely be much stronger than before. "Fat, why can't I sense the presence of a Saint Aura?" Nietion couldn't help but ask. He was also a little worried that the Saint Aura would pose a threat to him. The Saint Aura is a very mysterious power. You're too weak, so of course you can't sense it. Little Fat Cat chuckled and said, "However, this Saint Chi will definitely be of great benefit to your future growth." He could tell what Nietion was worried about. "Don't worry, you're someone with the Fiend God nascent embryo. If the Saint Aura posed any threat to you, it would have been devoured by the power of the Fiend Gods the moment it appeared. Since the Fiend God embryo didn't react, it means that the Saint Aura has already fused with you. It's a part of you now." Nietion let out a long sigh of relief when he heard Fat Cat's words. His face relaxed a lot. He suddenly looked at Lin Shun and sensed that the latter's origin spirit had awakened. He couldn't help but be surprised. "Lin Shun, your origin spirit has awakened." "Yes." Lin Shun nodded his little head and said excitedly, "Big Brother Nietion, my origin spirit is very powerful." With that, his little body shook, and a white shadow appeared behind him. Nietion looked at the white shadow and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. It seemed that the shadow was in the shape of a dragon. "Big Brother Nietion, this is my origin spirit, the Frost Wyvern." Lin Shan was very happy and said proudly, "Fat said that this is the origin spirit of a Ninth Order sovereign. Very powerful." Nietion nodded slightly and patted Lin Shen's head. The origin spirit of a Ninth Order sovereign was extremely rare. But since Lin Shan was a 9 elements fusing as one martial artist, his martial arts talent was outstanding. It was not strange for him to be able to awaken a supreme, primordial spirit. "Big Brother Nietion, What is your original spirit? Lin Chun withdrew his original spirit and suddenly raised his head to look at Nie Tian. Nie Tian smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. His primordial spirit was very powerful, but it was a pity that he could not use it now. Lin Chun was very smart. Seeing that Nie Tian did not answer, he no longer asked, "Fat, how long have we been in the Nine Extremities?" Nie Tian suddenly thought of something and asked in surprise. "It's been 1.5 months," the fat cat replied calmly. Originally, he thought that Nie Tian would only need a month to absorb the power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames. However, because of the sage soul, it dragged on for half a month. So long. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly said, "Let's go out and take a look. I wonder how Ni Jiaming is doing." When they entered the Nine Extremities, Ni Jiaming had been waiting outside. 1.5 months had passed. He had probably been waiting impatiently for a long time. Nie Tian did not hesitate and directly left the Nine Extremities with Lin Chun. The fat cat returned to the origin fetus space. After leaving the Nine Extremities, Nie Tian and Lin Chun appeared in the cave, but they did not find Ni Jiaming. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and wondered, could it be that Ni Jiaming left? However, on second thought, he felt that it was unlikely. Ni Jiaming was not the kind of person who would leave without saying goodbye. This aura. At this moment, Lin Chun seemed to feel something. His pupils suddenly shrank, and he immediately shouted, "It's Big Brother!" The next moment, he suddenly sprinted towards the depths of the cave. Lin Chun, seeing this, Nie Tian called out and immediately followed. The two quickly arrived at the depths of the cave, and an empty space appeared in front of them. In front of them, a familiar figure appeared. It was Ni Jiaming, and beside Ni Jiaming, there was a figure lying on the ground with a very weak aura. Big Brother. Seeing the figure on the ground, Lin Chun wailed and directly rushed over. Nie Tian's eyes widened, and he went blank for a moment before he came to his senses. The person lying beside Ni Jiaming was Lin Chun's big brother. What the hell was going on? He took a step forward and came to Ni Jiaming's side, but he saw that Ni Jiaming's eyebrows were tightly knitted and his face was very ugly. The person lying on the ground was pale and unconscious. Obviously, he was already in a state of dying. Lin Chun grabbed the person's hand and wailed loudly. Ni Jiaming, what happened? Nie Tian frowned and asked anxiously. Nie Tian, this cave is where I hid the dragon's spring vein. Ni Jiaming let out a long breath and began to explain. After listening to Ni Jiaming, Nie Tian finally understood everything. It turned out that this cave was the cave where the dragon spring vein was hidden. Ni Jiaming did not know this before. He accidentally came to the depths of the cave and found Lin Yi. Then he remembered everything. The person lying at his feet was Lin Chun's big brother, Lin Yi. Lin Yi and the others came to this cave a few months ago, originally for the dragon spring vein. However, they had accidentally triggered a killing formation in the cave. The others had died miserably on the spot, and only Lin Yi had survived. However, he had been trapped in a restrictive barrier. Ni Jiaming found Lin Yi in the cave, and it took him more than a month to break the restrictive barrier and rescue Lin Yi. However, the current Lin Yi was already in a state of dying because of the suppression of the restrictive power. Ni Jiaming used a large amount of his life aura to barely save Lin Yi's life. What do we do now? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and his eyes swept to Lin Yi. His divine senses sensed that the latter's aura was extremely weak, as if it would disappear at any time. My blood. I can use my blood to save my brother. At this moment, Lin Chun suddenly thought of something, and he screamed and directly bit his finger. Stop! However, at this moment, Ni Jiaming screamed and stopped Lin Chun. Why don't you let me save my brother? Lin Chun raised his head and looked at Ni Jiaming angrily. Ni Jiaming frowned and said, Your brother is very weak now, and his body is filled with a strong restrictive power. He can't accept any power now. Otherwise, he will cause the restrictive power to backfire and die instantly. This, Nie Tian heard Ni Jiaming's words, and his expression changed slightly. He did not expect the situation to be so serious. Even Lin Chen's blood couldn't save Lin Yi. Nie Tian immediately sensed, and indeed, he found that there was a strange power surging in Lin Ye's body, and it was going to become violent at any time. At this moment, even if he channeled the power of the earth vein source into Lin Ye's body, it would cause the restrictive power to backfire. Brother Nie Tian, please save my brother. I don't want him to die. Lin Shun was a child after all, and he was so scared that he cried and shouted loudly. Nie Tian's expression was ugly, and he did not know what to do in this situation. Fat Cat did not speak, and it was obvious that there was no other way. In this situation, there is only one way to save him. At this moment, Ni Jiaming's expression changed slightly, and a white light ball appeared in his hand. He said in a deep voice, "Let him integrate with this." Dragon Spring Vein. Nie Tian looked at the light ball in Ni Jiaming's hand, and his eyes trembled, and he exclaimed. Chapter 22:31. Fusing with the Dragon Spring Vein. Nie Tian was stunned when he heard Ni Jiaming's words. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. Until now, he still did not know what the essence of the Dragon Spring Vein was. But he knew that the Dragon Spring Vein contained an immeasurable amount of power. In fact, even he himself had never thought of merging with the Dragon Spring Vein. But now, in order to save Lin Yi, Ni Jiaming had asked the latter to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein. How could he not be shocked? Most importantly, he believed that Lin Ye's current state could not even accept the slightest bit of power. How could he fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein? And there was another question. Why would Ni Jiaming have a Dragon Spring Vein? I just obtained this Dragon Spring Vein from the cave. Ni Jiaming explained, then looked at Lin Shun and asked, Nie Tian, what do you think of Lin Shun? What do you mean? Nie Tian was stunned, not understanding what Ni Jiaming meant. He is only a child, and his martial cultivation is still at the most basic level. Ni Jiaming frowned and said, but his perception is unusually sharp, especially his perception of the dragon chi. It could be said to be abnormal. Have you never doubted this? Nie Tian was stunned. Ni Jiaming's words were indeed strange. Lin Chen's perception was indeed terrifying. Not to mention Nie Tian, even Fat Cat could not compare to it. Especially in terms of the dragon chi, it was even more terrifying. When he first came to the Burial Cloud Mountain Range, Nie Tian faintly sensed Di Shi's aura. But Lin Chen clearly sensed the dragon chi and even determined Di Shi's identity as a golden dragon. Later, Nie Tian learned that Lin Shun was a dragon spring martial artist who had merged 9 elements into one, so it was normal for his perception to be abnormal. But now that he thought about it, Lin Chen's perception seemed a little strange. Ni Jiaming, what do you want to say? Just say it. Nie Tian frowned and said in a deep voice, Lin Shun is a martial artist who fused with the Dragon Spring Vein. Ni Jiaming stared at Lin Shun and said in a deep voice, What? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that Lin Shun had actually merged with the Dragon Spring Vein. How powerful was the Dragon Spring Vein? Lin Shun was only a child. How could he fuse with it? Nie Tian, that is indeed the case. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out. Nie Tian was taken aback and stood rooted to the ground. Since Fat Cat said so, then there was no doubt about it. But he really couldn't imagine that a child like Lin Shun could fuse with something as powerful as the Dragon Spring Vein. The Dragon Spring Vein was divided into 6 parts by Ni Jiaming. The largest part was with Zhua Zhua, who is currently helping Sakura and Jian Qingxi reconstruct their bodies. The other 5 were nowhere to be found. From the looks of it, Lin Chen's body had fused with one of the 5 Dragon Spring Veins. There was another copy in Ni Jiaming's hands, and Ni Jiaming was prepared to use the Dragon Spring Vein to save Lin Yi. It is precisely because Lin Shun has fused with the Dragon Spring Vein that he can resist the power of the 9 primordial divine seal. Ni Jiaming nodded and said, Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived so long. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, as if he had understood something. He finally realized why Lin Shun had said that he was very important to the clan, and that if anything happened to him, it would bring disaster to the clan. So he was someone who had fused with the Dragon Spring Vein. Is it easy to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein? Nietion looked at Ni jamming and asked in a deep voice. If Lin Shun could fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein, then Lin Yu would definitely be able to as well. It seemed that according to Ni jamming, fusing with the Dragon Spring Vein was a very easy thing to do. Fusing with the Dragon Spring Vein requires a special method that only the Protector clans can do. Ni jamming looked at Lin Yi and said, "So we must bring him back to the clan now." Ni jamming's words made Nietion furrow his brows. He then said, Ni jamming, there's still some things that I haven't told you about the Protector clans. Is it about the betrayal of the Protector clans? Ni jamming asked with a frown. You already know about it? Nietion was stunned for a moment before he asked back. Ni jamming shook his head and said with a bitter smile, I guessed it. Then he continued, Actually, I was the one who told the Protector clans the method to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein. Nietion was stunned for a moment before he understood something. He frowned and asked, Ni jamming, you already knew that the Protector clans would betray you. Why did you still tell them the method to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein? Ni jamming had divided the Dragon Spring Vein into 6 parts because he knew that the Protector clans would betray him. Since he knew this, why did he tell the Protector clans the method to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein? Wasn't this equivalent to tempting the Protector clans to betray him? And now, Ni jamming actually took the initiative to ask Lin Yi to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein. Thinking of this, Nietion's expression changed. He had a guess in his mind. Ni jamming gave the Dragon Spring Vein to the Protector clans because he wanted them to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein. When this thought appeared, Lin Ye's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. Ni jamming couldn't help laughing when he saw the change in Nietion's expression. He said, Nietion, you're right. The betrayal of the Protector clans, including the Protector clans fusing with the Dragon Spring Vein. These things are all within my expectations. But please believe me, I did it for a reason. The identity of those who fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein needs to change. There must be an envoy of the Divine Dragon among the Protector clans. This is their destiny. After saying this, Ni jamming looked at Lin Yi with a firm gaze. Envoy of the Divine Dragon. Nietion couldn't help but be stunned when he heard this name. Nietion, I don't have time to explain too much to you. There are many things that I still haven't completely remembered. Ni jamming frowned and said, but I have a feeling that what I'm doing now is the right thing to do. Nietion looked at Ni jamming. He didn't know what to say. It seemed that Ni jamming had been playing a very big game of chess from the very beginning. The Divine Dragon tribe, the Dragon Rebel tribe, and the Protector clans were all important chess pieces in this game of chess. Even now, he, the person who set up the game, had become a chess piece on the chessboard. Nietion couldn't be sure if Ni jamming was trustworthy. At some point, he sensed something very clear in Ni jamming's eyes. He made up his mind and chose to believe in Ni jamming. Nietion, he doesn't have much time left. We must leave immediately. Ni jamming said nervously as he pointed at Lin Yi. Nietion nodded and said, let's go now. Then, Nietion, Ni jamming, and the others quickly arrived at the entrance of the cave. Chapter 22:32. Standing at the entrance of the cave, Nietion and the others couldn't help but stare blankly into the distance. Thousands of black-clothed martial artists were standing in the sky outside the cave. They looked like dark clouds that surrounded the entire Thousand Devil Mountain. These cultivators guarded the various entrances of the Thousand Demon Mountain, not daring to relax in the slightest. They were the Imperial Guard of the Dying Night Empire. They were ordered by the Emperor to seal off the entire Thousand Devil Mountain. It seems that the matter of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus has been exposed. Nietion frowned as he looked at the scene outside the cave. He knew that the matter of the 9-hearted lotus would be discovered sooner or later. But he didn't expect it to be so serious. The Dying Night Empire valued the 9-hearted lotus very much. They actually sent out the Dying Night Imperial Guard to surround the entire Thousand Devil Mountain. There were 3,000 of them, and every one of them had the strength of a late-stage paramount god. The presence of so many experts at the same time was absolutely shocking. Inside the cave, Nietion's eyes focused on a black-clothed swordsman. His face darkened, and he said, "This is bad. Even this guy is here. That black-clothed swordsman's aura is so strong. Who is he?" N.I. Jiaming's expression changed slightly. "One of the 3 legendary swordsmen of a land of the Forsaken, Anya Minjia," Nietion said with a deep voice. His eyes were filled with worry. He didn't expect that Anya Minjia would also be here. "What should we do?" Nietion's face darkened. His mind was racing. With the strength of Nietion and N.I. Jiaming, it was impossible for them to rush out. "It's a pity that Lord D. she isn't here." N.I. Jiaming frowned and sighed. Nietion glanced at N.I. Jiaming and didn't ask where D. she went. He thought for a moment, and then locked his eyes on a person next to Anya Minjia. "Yi Chunli. I can only take a gamble." Nietion stared at Yi Chunli and made up his mind. He turned to N.I. Jiaming and said, "You guys stay here. Don't go out." "Nietion, what are you doing?" N.I. Jiaming could not help but ask in surprise when he saw that Nietion's expression was off. "N.I. Jiaming, take Brother Linshun and take this opportunity to leave." Nietion smiled faintly. Then his figure moved, and he directly rushed out of the cave. N.I. Jiaming and Linshun were stunned at the same time. Obviously, they did not expect Nietion to rush out directly. They wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Nietion's figure was already outside the cave. "Sir Dark Knight Sword Saint, long time no see." Nietion dashed out of the cave and hovered high up in the sky. He looked at Anya Minjia with a playful look on his face, as if nothing had happened. "Nietion." When Yi Chunli saw Nietion, he let out a weird cry and took a step forward. At the same time, the thousands of passing Night Star Guard up in the sky also took a step forward. Their vast and boundless energy surged toward Nietion like raging waves. But Nietion was not the least bit afraid. His body shook, and the sword energy around him surged violently, blocking the vast energy in the sky. Even though his opponents were 3,000 late paramount gods, it was not very likely that they would be able to crush Nietion with their energy. "Nietion, you're courting death." Yi Chunli roared. His figure suddenly moved, and he was actually about to attack. But at this moment, a low voice rang out, blocking Yi Chunli's way. It was Anya Minjia. "Master!" Yi Chunli took a step back, looked at Anya Minjia, and called out respectfully. "How bold of you, Nietion," Anya Minjia said, staring coldly at Nietion. "I can't believe you dare to come out in the face of such a powerful force." Less than 2 months ago, when he had first met Nietion, the latter had been a peak over god. Who could have guessed that he would be an early paramount god now? Furthermore, his energy seemed to be on the verge of breaking through to the mid-paramount god level. The speed at which he was advancing was terrifying. What was even stranger was that Yi Chunli had clearly told him that Nietion had entered the 5th level of the cave, but now he had emerged from the 6th. He had already searched through the 99th cave on the 5th level and found nothing there. However, he didn't believe that Nietion could just vanish into thin air. Therefore, he had sent people to surround the entire 1,000 Devil Mountains. Just as he had expected, Nietion showed up again. He had no idea why Nietion had emerged from the 6th level of the cave. But that wasn't important anymore. What was important was that Nietion had shown up. "You sure have a lot of free time, Sword Sage Anya. You came all the way here to watch the show." With a playful smile, Nietion said, "I don't think Lord Sword Saint will fight me. Will he?" Anya Minjia laughed coldly. "You don't need to provoke me, Nietion. Given my status, I don't want to fight you. Besides, the game is still going on. Of course I'll abide by the rules. As you can see, these people in front of you are all late paramount gods," Yang Qi said. "That means we're all people who abide by the rules." Nietion nodded with a smile. "Sword Sage Anya, you sure have good aura. You really do abide by the rules. Sending out 3,000 late paramount gods wasn't a violation of the rules. But if all 3,000 of them were put together, even a peak God Realm expert wouldn't be a match for them. Even if Nietion could kill one with one sword move, he would still die of exhaustion in the end. Without wasting any time, Anya Minjia said, Niet Tian, hand over the 9 hearts, demon lotus. Niet Tian smiled. Sword Sage Anya, I did take the 9 hearts demon lotus, but I don't want to hand it over. Upon hearing Niet Tian's words, Anya Minjia's eyes narrowed, and he said coldly, Brat, there are over 1,000 9 hearts demon lotuses. You're really greedy to take them all. Greed is one of my strengths. Niet Tian smiled. 9 extremities appeared in his hand. With a thought, he took out a 9 hearts demon lotus and threw it to Anya Minjia. What do you mean? Anya Minjia caught the 9 hearts demon lotus in surprise. He didn't understand what Niet Tian meant. Nothing, Niet Tian said with a faint smile. I just wanted you to confirm that I took all of the 9 hearts demon lotuses. Then, holding the 9 extremities in his hand, he said, Sword Sage Anya, this thing in my hand is called the 9 extremities. It's a small world inside. All the 9 hearts demon lotus are in there. Really? When Yi Chenli heard that all of the 9 hearts demon lotuses were within the 9 extremities, his gaze, which was looking at the 9 extremities, instantly trembled. Your Highness, don't get excited. Niet Tian, however, laughed and said, 9 ultimates is marked with my soul imprints. I can destroy it with a single thought. As for the 9 hearts demon lotus, it will be destroyed along with it. I don't think you want to see that. Chapter 22:33. Yi Chenli's eyes trembled. He thought that Niet Tian was really going to destroy the 9 extremities. Niet Tian, however, had a calm smile on his face. Of course, he wasn't going to destroy the 9 extremities. The 9 hearts demon lotus was inside. Moreover, the Pishio and the golden lion were still inside. He just wanted to prove that he had the ability to destroy the 9 extremities at any time. Niet Tian, what do you want? Just say it. Anya Minjia said calmly. He could tell that Niet Tian was just putting on an act when he threatened to destroy the 9 extremities. He was just asking for something. Lord Sword Sage, I can take out 109 hearts demon lotuses right now in exchange for your word, Niet Tian said solemnly as he looked at Anya Minjia. Huh? Anya Minjia was stunned and asked, what word? Niet Tian's lips twitched, and he said loudly, Enai Jiaming, come out. As soon as he finished speaking, Enai Jiaming and the others walked out of the cave. Anya Minjia glanced at Enai Jiaming and the others and was slightly stunned. He didn't pay much attention to them and said directly, You want me to let them go, right? Lord Sword Sage is indeed smart. Niet Tian nodded with a smile and said, As long as you guarantee that they can leave safely, I will immediately take out 109 hearts demon lotuses. How about that? Teacher agreed to it, Yi Chenli said in a low voice. He was extremely tempted. In his opinion, Enai Jiaming and the others were completely dispensable. He didn't care about them at all. What he cared about was the 9 hearts demon lotuses and Niet Tian. As long as Niet Tian and the 9 hearts demon lotuses were there, it didn't matter whether the others died or not. 109 hearts demon lotuses were only 1/10 of the total number of 9 hearts demon lotuses. But for Yi Chenli, it was very tempting. After all, he could really get the 109 hearts demon lotuses. If Niet Tian was really cornered, he might destroy the 9 ultimates. If that happened, wouldn't they lose everything? Anya Minjia glared at Yi Chenli coldly. Obviously, he did not like the latter making decisions for him. After thinking for a moment, he said heavily, Niet Tian, I agree to your conditions. Very good. Niet Tian lightly smiled. With a thought, he opened his palm, and one by one, the 9 hearts demon lotus appeared. Very quickly, there were 100 of them floating in the air. He directly pushed the 109 heart demonic lotuses to Anya Minjia and said, Sword Sage, you shouldn't be the kind of villain who goes back on his word. Anya Minjia took all the 9 hearts demonic lotuses and said cold, Niet Tian, you are underestimating me. Let them go. Anya Minjia bellowed and waved his hand in the air. The passing night royal guards in the sky moved and opened up a path. Enai Jiaming, you guys can leave. Niet Tian turned to look at Enai Jiaming and said with a faint smile, Don't worry, I will be fine. Enai Jiaming frowned. Apparently, he did not expect that Niet Tian would do this. Brother Niet Tian, Lin Chen's little face was full of worry. and she couldn't help crying. Lin Shun, I told you are a man. You shouldn't cry. Nie Tian laughed, not the slightest bit nervous. Then he sent a voice transmission to Ni Jianming, saying, Ni Jianming, now is not the time to hesitate. Go and do what you need to do. I'm also looking forward to seeing what kind of person the divine dragon messenger you mentioned is. It seemed that Ni Jianming wanted to use the dragon spring vein to create the divine dragon messenger. Only those who integrated with the dragon spring vein could become the divine dragon messenger. Okay, we are leaving. Take care of yourself. Seeing the determination in Nie Tian's eyes, Ni Jianming no longer hesitated. After a heavy nod, he left with Lin Shun and Lin Yi. In the air, Lin Shun took out the strange blackbird from the spiritual pet belt. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the distance. Nie Tian knew that the strange blackbird was very fast, and that Ni Jianming and the others were safe. Then, he looked at Anya Minjia and the others. Next, it was time to think about how he was going to leave. You really are an interesting person, Nie Tian, Anya Minjia said. At a time like this, you are still thinking about your friends. Not everyone has that kind of breadth of mind. Anya Minjia smiled faintly, then said in a cold tone, I am very curious. How are you going to leave this place? There were 3,000 late-stage paramount gods in front of Nie Tian. Furthermore, they were the Imperial Guard of the Dying Night Empire, and were far stronger than ordinary late-stage paramount gods. Given Nie Tian's current battle prowess, dealing with a dozen at once was already his limit. It was no exaggeration to say that 3,000 passing Night Imperial Guard would be enough to kill Nie Tian with a single move. Exalted Sword Sage, it was a pleasant deal. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, Why don't we make another deal now? What do you think? Anya Minjia smiled cold, killing intent flickering in his eyes. Given the current situation, do I really need to make a deal with you? You seem to have forgotten that I still have a lot of 9 hearts, Demon Lotus, Exalted Sword Sage. Nie Tian frowned as he reminded Anya Minjia. Humph. Anya Minjia chuckled coldly. You probably don't know how important you are, Nie Tian. I'll tell you the truth. As long as I can kill you, I won't take a single 9 hearts, Demon Lotus. Right now, I already have 109 hearts, Demon Lotus. That's enough. Nie Tian frowned. He hadn't expected Anya Minjia to say such a thing. But a moment later, he calmed down and smiled. Exalted Sword Sage, are you really so confident that you can kill me? 3,000 late-stage paramount gods? You won't be able to escape. Anya Minjia smiled cold, his killing intent surging. Who said I was going to escape? Nie Tian laughed. Looking at the cave behind him, he said, This 1,000 Devil Mountain is my best defense. Once I enter the cave, I'd like to ask, how many of these 3,000 warriors will be able to enter? Anya Minjia's eyes narrowed. He had forgotten about that. Nie Tian had just come out of the 6th level. If he went back and hid there, it would be very safe. Of the 3,000 passing Night Imperial Guard, not a single one would be able to enter the 6th level. Only Yi Chunli alone barely had the chance to enter the 6th level of the cave. Tell me about your deal, Nie Tian, Anya Minjia said without the slightest hesitation. Actually, if Nie Tian had returned to the cave, he could have already sent people to guard it. But he didn't want to do that. He was curious as to what kind of deal Nie Tian would propose. A determined smile appeared at the corner of Nie Tian's mouth as he said in a loud voice, Lord Sword Saint, I want a fair duel. A fair duel? With whom? Anya Minjia asked, looking surprised. With this guy next to you, the one who once tried to kill me with a single sword strike. Nie Tian spun around and pointed at Yi Chunli. Chapter 2234. As Nie Tian's voice faded, a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. His cold eyes were fixed on Yi Chunli. When Yi Chunli had fought Nie Tian for the first time, he'd boasted that if he couldn't kill Nie Tian in one move, he wouldn't make another move. But this guy had been too shameless. He hadn't been able to kill Nie Tian in one move, so he'd let someone else do it instead. Nie Tian hadn't forgotten about that. That was why he wanted to fight Yi Chunli to the death. Anya Minjia's eyes narrowed when he heard Nie Tian's words. He was clearly surprised. He hadn't expected that the deal Nie Tian was talking about was a fight to the death with Yi Chenli. Nie Tian, you want to fight me to the death? Yi Chenli's gaze suddenly shook, and he actually seemed to be slightly surprised. At the same time, he revealed a wisp of terror that couldn't be concealed. What? Are you afraid? Nie Tian saw Yi Chenli's reaction and couldn't help but sneer, extremely provocative. Anya Minjia could sense Yi Chenli's nervousness, and his face darkened. Are you nervous, Chenli? He said coldly. He didn't understand Yi Chenli's reaction. Yi Chenli was his disciple, and he knew exactly how strong he was. Even though Yi Chenli had destroyed his own martial arts foundation and his strength had dropped, his battle prowess was still far beyond that of an ordinary peak paramount god. On top of that, Yi Chenli was a peak swordsman, and his overall battle prowess was even more terrifying. On the other hand, Nie Tian was only an early paramount god, and his sword Dao was only at the elementary level. Anya Minjia didn't understand why Yi Chenli would be scared in such a situation. He knew that Yi Chenli was a proud person. Even in the face of opponents stronger than him, he'd never been afraid. But now, facing someone weaker than him, he was actually scared. That was a little hard to understand. Master, this kid's strength is very strange, Yi Chenli said, his eyes trembling. Yi Chenli's gaze trembled, and he said with an embarrassed expression, there is an extremely terrifying rune in his body that can allow him to instantly increase his strength. Back when he was a peak godlord, he could unleash those magical symbols to push him to the level of a late paramount god. He's already an early paramount god, Yang Qi thought. Once he activates the magical symbols, he'll be as strong as a peak paramount god. At this point, Yi Chenli suddenly looked at Nie Tian. His gaze was even more nervous as he said, there's one more thing. His martial physique is extremely terrifying. It's practically abnormal. Previously, when he was heavily injured, he took a direct hit from my sword. And that sword actually didn't kill him. After hearing what Yi Chenli had to say, the way Anya Minjia looked at Nie Tian also changed slightly. He did not expect that Nie Tian's strength was actually so formidable that it made Yi Chenli so apprehensive. Although he had seen Nie Tian before, he had not seen the latter fight with his own eyes. As far as he was concerned, someone who had just become a paramount god wouldn't be able to do much. However, Yi Chenli's current attitude had caused his opinion of Nie Tian to change somewhat. So, Yi Chenli, it seems you won't accept the challenge? Nie Tian said, chuckling coldly and looking at Yi Chenli with a look of contempt. He hadn't expected Yi Chenli to be so scared. Who could have guessed that someone as arrogant as Yang Qi would be so cautious? How about this? I can guarantee that I won't be as strong as a peak paramount god. Okay. Nie Tian smiled playfully. Really? Hearing Nie Tian's words, Yi Chenli's gaze couldn't help but tremble, and his eyes became blazing hot. His biggest fear of Nie Tian was that Nie Tian might unleash those magical symbols and break through to the peak paramount god level. He knew that if Nie Tian broke through to the peak paramount god level, he would be far stronger than any ordinary warrior. Do I look like I'm joking? Nie Tian said, chuckling mockingly. Yi Chenli was a peak sword martial expert, and yet he was acting so cowardly. How embarrassing. All right, at this moment, Anya Minjia's voice rang out. Since that's the case, I agree to this battle on behalf of Yi Chenli. Given the circumstances, Anya Minjia wouldn't be able to stand by and watch Yi Chenli cower. After all, he was Yi Chenli's teacher. If his disciple were to cower, he would lose face. You don't have any objections, do you, Yi Chenli? Nie Tian asked provocatively. If you want to fight, Nie Tian, then I'll take you on. Yi Chenli growled. Since Anya Minjia had agreed, he had no choice but to put his life on the line. If Nie Tian had kept his strength at the level of a late paramount god, then he would have been more confident in his chances. Excellent. Nie Tian smiled confidently, then looked at Anya Minjia and said, Exalted sword sage, let's fight to the death. If I lose or die, everything I have will belong to you. But if I win, I won't kill Yi Chenli. But you have to let me go unconditionally. That's a fair deal, right? Anya Minjia's mouth curled into a strange smile as he nodded in agreement. He had been very confident in Yi Chunli's strength, but Yi Chunli's reaction just now had disappointed him. At this moment, he couldn't help but look forward to seeing how powerful Nie Tian's battle prowess was. Very good. Nie Tian smiled. Exalted Sword Sage is one of the 3 legendary swordsmen in the land of the Forsaken. He stands at the peak of the sword world. And I, Nie Tian, am just a junior in the Sword Dao. Given your status, Exalted Sword Sage, you won't go back on your word, will you? Anya Minjia's expression darkened. There's no need to be sarcastic, Nie Tian. I, Anya Minjia, am a proud swordsman. I won't go back on my word with a junior like you. That's good. Nie Tian smiled faintly, looking proud. Anya Minjia's identity was to get a guarantee from Yi Chunli. Since Anya Minjia could set foot at the peak of the sword world, it meant that he was a swordsman and wouldn't go back on his word. Anya Minjia looked coldly at Nie Tian. He waved his hand, and the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards in the sky all retreated, creating a space of tens of thousands of meters. Brat, I'd like to see how strong you are to be so confident, Anya Minjia said cold, staring at Nie Tian. At this moment, Yi Chunli took a step forward and leaped into the sky. He looked at Nie Tian and said cold, "Come on, as you wish." Nie Tian smiled faintly. He moved and came to the sky, standing opposite Yi Chunli. Nie Tian, you'll definitely lose this battle. Yi Chunli's eyes were as gloomy as water. He growled, and the sword momentum of his body rose. Nie Tian had a playful look on his face. He twitched his mouth and murmured, "Sorry, I'll definitely win this battle." Chapter 22:35. Boom, boom. High up in the sky, 2 enormous sword auras surged at the same time. The swift and fierce auras seemed to be able to tear the world apart. Nie Tian and Yi Chunli stood in the void like 2 giant swords, constantly releasing extremely violent sword essences. Bang! Before the 2 of them made a move, the 2 sword auras collided in the air. The entire world seemed to shake. That silver-haired kid's sword aura is so strong. He can actually fight head-on with the Crown Prince. The eyes of the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards lit up, and they looked extremely shocked. They knew how terrifying Yi Chunli was, but they did not expect that Nie Tian's sword aura was no weaker than Yi Chunli's. There was no doubt that this battle would be very exciting. This kid's sword essence is so terrifying. On the other side, Anya Minjia's expression also changed as he thought to himself. What he was concerned about was not Nie Tian's sword aura, but his sword essence. He knew that Nie Tian was a beginner-level swordsman, but his sword essence was no weaker than Yi Chunli's. In fact, it was even stronger. This was very terrifying. Yi Chunli was a peak swordsman, and his swordsmanship realm was much higher than Nie Tian's. Under such circumstances, Nie Tian's sword essence was actually stronger than Yi Chunli's. One could imagine how high the quality of his sword essence was. Yi Chunli was a top-notch swordsman in the entire Abandoned Land. The quality of his sword essence was already very terrifying. However, compared to Nie Tian, his sword essence was much weaker. If this kid's swordsmanship realm was the same as mine, his sword essence would definitely crush mine. Anya Minjia thought to himself as his eyes flickered coldly. As a swordsman, he naturally did not want to admit that his sword essence was weaker than others. However, when facing Nie Tian, he had to admit it. He had met countless swordsmen in his life, including many swordsmanship masters. However, in terms of the terrifying sword essence, Nie Tian was undoubtedly the best. It's hard to imagine that there is such a terrifying swordsman in the world. Anya Minjia was shocked, and the corners of his mouth twitched. Before meeting Nie Tian, Anya Minjia found it hard to believe that there was such a terrifying sword intent in the world. He didn't know why Nie Tian was able to nurture such a powerful sword intent. Nie Tian die. Right at this moment, Yi Chunli's voice rang out. Li Yuan slashed down ferociously, and a sword shadow descended diagonally like a dark mountain, smashing towards Nie Tian. All of a sudden, Nye Tian looked up and unleashed forbidden magical symbols, causing his energy to skyrocket as his cultivation base rose to the late paramount god level. Nye Tian's lips twitched as he thought, I was right. Now that I've lowered the level of the warding talisman, I'm only as strong as a late paramount god. After being purified by the saint's aura, the forbidden technique rune's rank dropped to advanced yellow class. Even though Nye Tian was an early paramount god, the forbidden technique rune only pushed him to the late paramount god level. He had just told Yi Chenli that he would limit his strength to the late paramount god level. However, the truth was that he would only be able to push himself to the late paramount god level. If Yi Chenli knew that, he would probably go mad with rage. What strange magical symbols! Anya Minjia's eyes flickered with astonishment as he sensed that Nye Tian's cultivation base had risen by 2 stages. Although Yi Chenli had told him that Nye Tian had strange magical symbols inside of him that could be used to boost his strength, Anya Minjia still hadn't believed it. But in his heart, he did not believe it. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, he finally believed it. This brat really has a lot of secrets. No wonder that Exalted One wanted to see him. Anya Minjia looked at Nye Tian with a bit of worry in his eyes. If Nye Tian defeated Yi Chenli, would Anya Minjia really let Nye Tian go? Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor, activate. Next, something completely shocking happened. Nye Tian stood in place, and instead of fighting back, he simply let out a growl. Immediately after, a layer of dazzling white light surged from his body, condensing into a white armor around his body. Nye Tian was now an early paramount god, and his 9 polarity war god incantation had reached the 8th division, the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor. He wasn't going to fight back, but rather defend. He wanted to see exactly how strong the 8th division of the 9 polarity war god incantation was. Are you looking to die? Yi Chenli shouted when he saw that Nye Tian wasn't moving, and his eyes flickered with killing intent. Suddenly, the sword in front of him began to shine with terrifying black light. As far as he was concerned, if Nye Tian didn't fight back, he would be courting death. He simply couldn't believe that Nye Tian could rely on pure defense to survive this attack. Rumble. In the next moment, the black sword descended like a waterfall onto the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor. A massive boom rang out, and everything seemed to go still for a moment. The black sword pierced through the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor, and the light on its edge almost touched Nye Tian. Astral Soul Shield, activate. In that moment, Nye Tian let out a low growl, and boundless astral power poured out of him, forming a shield of starlight around him. A muffled boom rang out, and Nye Tian was sent flying backward. Hovering in midair, he unfurled his astral soul wings and flapped them to stabilize himself. He's not dead, Yi Chenli said, his eyes trembling as he looked at Nye Tian, his face drained of blood. How could he ever have imagined that Nye Tian would be completely fine after taking his sword head-on? Yi Chenli, that sword attack of yours isn't very impressive. Nye Tian suddenly lifted his head and smiled faintly. His voice was extremely ear-piercing when it reached Yi Chenli's ears. At this moment, he couldn't say that he was completely fine. At the very least, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. That sword attack just now had caused him some minor injuries. Yi Chenli's strength was still very terrifying. Fortunately, Nye Tian was prepared and had activated the Astral Soul Shield at the crucial moment. Otherwise, he might have been seriously injured. It had to be said that the 8th tier of the 9 Extremities War God Incantation, the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor, was very freakish. It had almost blocked Yi Chenli's sword. One had to know that Yi Chenli was a martial artist who was even more terrifying than the average peak Paramount God. His sword could kill an ordinary peak Paramount God in the blink of an eye. Nye Tian had only relied on the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor to withstand most of the attack. This was very terrifying. Because of this, Yi Chenli's expression was so shocked. Yi Chenli wasn't the only one who was shocked. The 3,000 Dying Night Guardsmen and Anya Minjia were also shocked, especially Anya Minjia, whose facial features were all twisted together. Previously, Yi Chunli had told him that Nie Tian's martial body was freakishly strong. At first, he had wondered how freakishly strong an early-stage paramount god could be. But now he knew that Nie Tian's martial body was definitely stronger than most peak paramount gods. But now, Nie Tian was only an early-stage paramount god. At this moment, Nie Tian's status in Anya Minjia's heart rose by a large margin. The strongest sword intent, the strongest martial body. Chapter 2236. Yi Chunli, it's time for me to make a move. In the sky, Nie Tian looked at Yi Chunli and smiled coldly. His eyes were cold. Yi Chunli suddenly raised his head. When he saw Nie Tian's gaze, his body trembled involuntarily. At this moment, under Nie Tian's gaze, he actually felt that he was like a helpless little lamb. Are you afraid? Nie Tian saw Yi Chunli's reaction clearly and couldn't help but laugh coldly. Originally, he thought that Yi Chunli would be a decent opponent. He didn't expect the other party to be so cowardly. Yi Chunli was so cowardly that he was in his mother's womb. Before Nie Tian made a move, he was already terrified. Godly sword. Then, Nie Tian didn't hesitate at all and slashed with his sword. The shadow of the sword fell from the sky, and the brilliance of the sword suddenly blossomed. The space within tens of thousands of meters was filled with a terrifying sword intent. Yi Chunli felt threatened and immediately reacted. The abyss silence sword was raised high, and a shadow of the sword was also blasted out. Boom! Two sword shadows, one bright and one dark, collided with each other in the air like two wild beasts. In an instant, heaven and earth were silent, and the space also shook a little. But it was obvious that the sword of light was stronger. Yi Chunli's figure suddenly retreated in the sky, and he was forced to thousands of meters away. Before he could stabilize his body, a huge shadow of the sword appeared in the sky again and pressed down on him. Nie Tian didn't give Yi Chunli any chance to catch his breath. He attacked continuously and crazily. Yi Chunli activated the dark night devouring power in his body, and together with his abyss silent sword intent, he could barely protect himself. At this moment, when the passing Night Imperial Guards saw the scene in the sky, their expressions were extremely shocked, as if they didn't dare to believe their eyes. How could they possibly think that the dignified passing Night Crown Prince would actually be beaten by Nie Tian to the point where he couldn't retaliate? What's going on? His Highness is actually not this silver-haired brat's opponent. Why isn't His Highness fighting back? Isn't his bloodline power very strong? His Highness the Crown Prince must be waiting for an opportunity to kill this brat in one strike. The guard discussed in low voices. Even though Yi Chunli was already completely suppressed by Nie Tian, there were still people who felt that Yi Chunli was stronger than Nie Tian. How is this possible? On the other side, Anya Minjia's aged face was extremely ugly. He roared furiously in his heart. He was simply unwilling to believe the scene before him. He was a grandmaster figure in the way of the sword, so how could he not see that the current Yi Chunli was already in a state of absolute defeat without any chance of turning things around? To put it bluntly, Nie Tian was basically playing with Yi Chunli right now. As long as he was willing, he could kill Yi Chunli with a single slash at any time. Anya Minjia originally thought that even if Yi Chunli didn't have a 100% chance of winning against Nie Tian, he would at least have a 70 to 80% chance of winning. But now, the scene before him had completely destroyed the hope in his heart. Nie Tian's strength completely crushed Yi Chunli's. Up in the sky, Nie Tian's eyes glittered with fierce light, and his sword will surged around him. He hadn't expected the current situation to be like this. He had originally thought that if he wanted to defeat Yi Chunli, he would definitely have to fight a bloody battle. However, the current situation was much more optimistic than he had anticipated. He couldn't even figure out if Yi Chunli had suddenly become weaker, or if his own strength had increased by too much. According to his original expectations, even if he had become an early paramount god, he shouldn't have been this strong. But he didn't have time to think too much. His eyes flickered with cold light, and he shouted, "Yi Chunli, the next sword strike will decide who's going to win." Yi Chunli retreated repeatedly, and the sword intent all over his body had already been suppressed to an extremely small area. When he saw the look in Nie Tian's eyes, his heart trembled, and he felt like he had been plunged into an ice house. Almost subconsciously, he shouted, "Nie Tian, I concede." Concede? Nie Tian laughed, the corners of his mouth twitching involuntarily. He hadn't expected this at all. This battle had been surprisingly easy. Yi Chunli's sudden surrender stunned the 3,000 passing Night Star Guards, who were hundreds of thousands of meters away, and they were collectively petrified. Especially those who had been hoping that Yi Chunli would suddenly erupt and turn the situation around. These Star Guards couldn't understand this battle at all. From beginning to end, they felt that it was inconceivable. From the beginning to the end, other than the sword strike at the beginning, Yi Chunli was pressed to the ground and crushed by Nie Tian. This kind of result was too shocking. It was impossible to accept. Anya Minjia was stunned for a long time before he came to his senses. His expression was so ugly that it looked like he had been slapped dozens of times. Originally, he had regarded Yi Chunli as the disciple he was most proud of. But now, this disciple that he was most proud of had done things that made him lose face one after another. First, he was afraid to fight, and then he had conceded. Each time, he was more and more cowardly than the last. Yi Chunli, looks like I overestimated you in the past. Nie Tian's figure moved and retreated thousands of meters away. He looked at Yi Chunli with disdain and said loudly, "This battle was much easier than I expected." Ha ha ha. Insolent laughter resounded in the void, and it was like a series of resounding slaps that landed on Yi Chunli's face. Although this battle was a life-and-death battle, Nie Tian had said before that if he won, he wouldn't kill Yi Chunli. Yi Chunli's expression was ugly, and the muscles at the corners of his eyes were trembling. He roared angrily, "Nie Tian, if I hadn't destroyed my martial foundation, how could you be my opponent?" At this moment, he was so angry that he wished he could cut Nie Tian into 1,000 pieces. In order to kill Nie Tian, he destroyed his martial foundation. But now, he wasn't Nie Tian's opponent. How could he accept such a thing? "Yi Chunli, are you blaming me?" Before Nie Tian could say anything, Anya Minjia's voice rang out. The reason why Yi Chunli destroyed his martial foundation was that Anya Minjia had asked him to do so. Anya Minjia was unhappy that Yi Chunli had shouted such a thing. This disciple doesn't dare. Yi Chunli's eyes trembled. He knew that he had said something wrong and immediately knelt down in fear. "You better not dare." Anya Minjia replied coldly. Then, he looked at Nie Tian and said, "Nie Tian, your strength has indeed exceeded my expectations. Even if you stand on the opposite side of me now, I have to admit that you are the most talented swordsman I have ever seen. Lord Sword Sage, I don't need you to judge whether my talent in swordsmanship is strong or not." Nie Tian smiled faintly. His eyes flickered slightly, and he said directly, "This junior only wants to ask one thing. Can I leave now?" His calm voice contained some arrogance, some provocation, and some calmness. "You took the Yi clan's things and still want to leave." However, at this time, a deep and powerful voice rang out in the void. It had an extremely strong and oppressive aura. "Are you dreaming?" Chapter 22:37. Nie Tian could not help but frown as he stared at the black-robed figure above the void. It was an old man with wrinkles all over his aged face. His body was short and stooped, and he looked like a withered leaf in the wind as he stood there. Even so, his presence was extremely frightening, with a layer of dark aura vaguely flowing around his body. Although that dark aura did not appear to be powerful, it was like an ocean when perceived carefully, vast and endless. Judging from his presence alone, the black-robed elder's ability did not seem to be beneath Anya Minjia. At the moment, the black-robed elder's face was dark, his cold eyes staring fixedly at Nie Tian. "Ancestor!" Yi Chunli abruptly looked at the black-robed elder and cried out in surprise, his eyes filled with delight. "The three ancestors of Death Knight." Anya Minjia frowned as well. He actually did not notice that there was a person hiding in the void. Even so, he quickly recognized who it was. It was one of the three ancestors of Death Knight of the Death Knight Empire. The Death Knight Empire was extremely powerful, having three ancestor-level characters who were collectively known as the three ancestors of Death Knight. It was rumored that the three ancestors of Death Knight were all demi-saints. That elder has such a powerful presence. What level of champion is he? Yet Tion's gaze trembled as he stared at the black-robed elder, his heart filled with shock. That old man is similar to Anya Minjia and should be a demi-saint. That was when Fat Cat's voice rang with a somber tone. Demi-saint. Yet Tion did a double-take before asking, "What level is that, Fat?" Before this, Tion had already learned about the demi-saint realm. Not too long ago, he had even heard Fat Cat mention a demi-saint. And now, another demi-saint had appeared. He could not help but feel a little confused. Tion, now that you've asked, I'll tell you about it, Tion said. Fat Cat frowned. Actually, there are three intermediate levels between the pinnacle of Overgod and Saint. Demi-saint, demi-saint, and demi-saint. Demi-saint, demi-saint, false saint. Tion's eyes flickered when he heard little Fat Cat's words, and he secretly remembered the three realms. The Fat Cat nodded. Half-sages are people who are far stronger than peak paramount gods. However, there's a huge gap between them and sages. For example, Ming Jianyu. Ming Jianyu, the E-Moon Emperor, and the Dark Azura deity are all half-saints. As for demi-saints, they're the champions who are extremely close to becoming saints. The three legendary swordsmen and the old man in front of you are all demi-saints. As for pseudo-holiness, it's a little more complicated. Pseudo-saints, as the name suggests, are false saints. Pseudo-saints, although they are pseudo-saints, they are still stronger than demi-saints. That's because pseudo-saints are already able to produce sage chi and possess strength comparable to sages. The only difference is that they are unable to release sacred light. Holy light is the light of a saint. This is the symbol of a saint. Only those who possess the holy light are true saints. Pseudo-saints are pseudo-saints precisely because they do not have the holy light. After saying that, little Fat Cat nodded and did not say anything else. Yet Tion's gaze was quivering. Although the Fat Cat's words left him very shocked, he was already very clear. Demi-saint, demi-saint, and pseudo-saint. The three tiers in between were each more powerful than the last. It was especially true for pseudo-saints, who almost had the combat ability of a saint. The only difference was that they did not have the holy light. Fat, is that mysterious person a pseudo-saint? Yet Tion could not help asking when he suddenly remembered the mysterious person. Anya Minjia and the others were all demi-saints. On the other hand, the mysterious person had taken on a combined blow from both Anya Minjia and Guangwu Fengyan, and was clearly more powerful. That was why Tion really wanted to know if the mysterious person was a pseudo-saint. I don't know. Unexpectedly, the Fat Cat shook its head and said, that mysterious person is definitely more powerful than Anya Minjia and the others, but I can't be sure if he has reached the threshold of pseudo-saint. Tion was taken aback for a moment. It appeared that the Fat Cat's senses could not differentiate between demi-saints and pseudo-saints. But he was now certain that pseudo-saints were the pinnacle champions of the Forsaken Lands. There were probably not many pseudo-saints in the entire Forsaken Lands. Tion's expression could not help but darken after confirming the black-robed elder's ability. That elder clearly did not come with good intentions. He had no intention of letting Tion leave, and was instead intent on keeping Tion here. Yi Chenli addressed the elder as Elder, which meant that the latter was clearly someone from the Dead Knight Empire, and was probably here for the Nine Hearts Bewitching Lotus. Lord Sword Saint, please leave. Leave the matters here to this old man. That was when the Dead Knight ancestor looked at Anya Minjia and said flatly with a smile, "What do you mean, Your Excellency?" Anya Minjia was aware of the Dead Knight ancestor's identity, but he did not recognize him. He smiled coldly and said in a low voice, The Dead Knight ancestor could tell that Anya Minjia's tone was displeased, and his eyes narrowed as he smiled and said, "Lord Sword Saint, are you really going to let this kid go?" "Of course." Anya Minjia laughed loudly and said, "This is an agreement between me and him. Do you think that I would go back on my word?" The Dead Knight ancestor's face darkened, clearly not expecting that Anya Minjia would have such an attitude. Nietion's eyes fell on Anya Minjia, and the corner of his mouth could not help but curl up. He had not misjudged Anya Minjia. The latter had the demeanor of a swordsman. "Lord Sword Saint, this old man knows what you are thinking." The Dead Knight ancestor smiled sinisterly and said, "If you are afraid that what happened just now will be leaked, this old man can personally kill 3,000 Dead Knight Imperial Guards. As for Yi Chenli, he will not say a word. As for this old man, I will not even leave the Dead Knight Empire, let alone say anything. Lord Sword Saint, what do you think of this old man's suggestion?" His voice was not loud, but resounded in everyone's ears like a clap of thunder. The 3,000 Dead Knight Imperial Guards, in particular, turned pale with fright. In order to help Anya Minjia keep the secret, the Dead Knight ancestor was going to kill them all. "Are you insulting me by saying this?" Anya Minjia growled and said, Anya Minjia, do not think that I am a good person. However, I also have my own principles. Let me be a villain who goes back on his word. Sorry, Anya Minjia, can't do that." His ice-cold words were loud and clear, sonorous and forceful. The Dead Knight ancestor's face darkened again. He did not expect that his words would directly provoke Anya Minjia. He had originally thought that Anya Minjia was worried about his reputation, so he wanted to let Nietion go. However, it now seemed that Anya Minjia was an extremely principled person who took his promises very seriously. "Lord Sword Saint, this kid is someone that the person behind you wants. Are you really going to let him go?" The Dead Knight ancestor's eyes were extremely gloomy as he asked in a deep voice. It was obvious that he wanted to use the person behind Anya Minjia to suppress him. Chapter 22:38. Nietion looked at Anya Minjia and couldn't help but smile. He hadn't expected things to turn out this way. "Teacher, this." Yi Chenli was stunned. He looked at Anya Minjia in confusion and didn't know what to say. "Sir Sword Sage, what if I insist on killing this guy?" The Dead Knight ancestor's tone became cold. "You can try." Anya Minjia responded cold. He took a step forward and released a terrifying sword momentum that shot up to the sky, causing dark clouds to roll. Anya Minjia's action was very threatening. Obviously, he was really angry at this moment. If the Dead Knight ancestor continued to force him, he would definitely attack. "Anya Minjia, don't force me." The Dead Knight ancestor didn't give in. He moved, and a dark aura rose from his body, covering the whole area. The surrounding space immediately became dark. "You're forcing me." Anya Minjia's eyes were dark. He was ready to attack. Nietion was speechless. It would be funny if Anya Minjia and the Dead Knight ancestor fought. The Dead Knight ancestor's eyes trembled. He didn't expect Anya Minjia to be so tough. In his opinion, what Anya Minjia was doing was so stupid that he couldn't understand it. Anya Minjia was here to kill Nietion, but now he wanted to protect Nietion. Was it worth it for the so-called promise and trust? The Dead Knight ancestor and Anya Minjia were two completely different people. Some people thought that promises were *T and worthless. But some people thought that promises were everything and more valuable than life. Sir Sword Sage. The Dead Knight ancestor's eyes trembled, but he didn't attack. He said, "I'll give you face today." Then he looked at Nietion and said, "Boy, you're very lucky. Now, as long as you hand over the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, you can get lost." Hand over the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus? Nietion was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Did I hear wrong? According to our previous agreement, as long as I defeat Yi Chenli, I will be able to leave immediately. May I ask, why should I hand over the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus?" When Forefather Death Knight heard Nietion's words, his face suddenly darkened. He didn't expect that Nietion would still dare to push his luck even after he made such a big concession. Allowing Nietion to leave this place alive was already the most lenient old ancestor Dead Knight could be. Nietion actually wanted to leave with the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. That was simply a dream. Brat, don't challenge my patience. Old ancestor passing night spoke sternly. His old face was incomparably hideous, and it was almost impossible to tell that he was human. I can't be bothered with you. Old ancestor Death Knight was extremely furious, but Nyetian still had a calm expression. After a faint smile, he directly said to Anya Minjia, senior sword sage, according to our previous agreement, I can leave directly. Anya Minjia frowned. He didn't expect Nyetian to be so calm and so arrogant. However, he knew that what Nyetian said just now was not wrong. At this moment, he finally realized how smart Nyetian was. When Nyetian made the agreement with him, he specifically stated that as long as he defeated Yi Chunli and didn't kill him, he could leave unconditionally. Therefore, according to the agreement, Nyetian could leave directly. What a cunning brat. It seems that I have been used by you, Anya Minjia said darkly in his heart, but he couldn't show it on the surface. Who asked him to promise Nyetian? Now, no matter what the result was, he could only grit his teeth and swallow it. Nyetian leave. Anya Minjia frowned and said in a cold tone, We'll meet again, Lord Sword Saint. With a complacent smile, Nyetian blurred into action and prepared to leave. Stop him. However, at this moment, old ancestor Death Knight roared angrily, completely ignoring Anya Minjia. Yes, the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards responded in unison. Their voices were like thunder. In the next moment, thousands of figures moved at the same time. Like dark clouds pressing down from the sky, they shrouded Nyetian. Who dares to move? Almost at the same time, Anya Minjia suddenly roared. Then his body shook, and a terrifying sword essence was released. It turned into a wave of sword essence that could be seen by the naked eye and spread into the sky. Boom! Waves of sword essence filled the air like raging waves. The 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards were hit by the wave of sword essence. Their aura collapsed, and their figures were sent flying in all directions. Nyetian was shocked at the scene before him. The power of a demi-saint was truly terrifying. A single wave of sword essence was enough to scatter 3,000 late-stage supreme gods. And yet Tian knew that Anya Minjia was being merciful. Otherwise, the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards would have been crushed in a mincemeat by the sword essence. Thank you, Sword Sage. Nyetian smiled and flapped his wings, flying up into the sky. Old Ancestor Death Knight looked at Nyetian from afar. His face was so dark that it was dripping blood, but he did not dare to make a move. Seeing Nyetian's figure disappear, Yi Chunli looked stunned and could not help but shout, Old Ancestor, why didn't you make a move and kill that brat? Shut up. Old Ancestor Death Knight roared and glared at Yi Chunli cold. Of course, he wanted to stop Nyetian, but he did not dare. That was because he knew that a terrifying person was hiding behind Nyetian. Yi Chunli could make a move, and so could the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards, but Old Ancestor Death Knight could not. If he made a move, he would be breaking the rules. This small action could bring about a calamity to the Dead Knight Empire. Old Ancestor Death Knight had heard that the person behind Nyetian was a pseudo-saint. Even the Dead Knight Empire could not afford to offend a pseudo-saint. No one knew where this pseudo-saint was. Perhaps he was right beside Nyetian. Old Ancestor Death Knight did not dare to risk the entire Dead Knight Empire. The loss of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus was indeed a heavy blow to the Dead Knight Empire, but it was not fatal. If they offended a pseudo-saint, it would be a disaster. That was why Old Ancestor Death Knight would rather watch Nyetian leave than make a move. On the other side, Anya Minjia looked at Nyetian's back with an extremely ugly expression. A moment later, he moved and left. Letting Nyetian go, he had to quickly explain to the person behind him. Seeing that Anya Minjia had left, Yi Chunli asked Old Ancestor Death Knight with an ugly expression, Old Ancestor, what should we do? Humph, humph, humph. Suddenly, Old Ancestor Death Knight laughed sinisterly. A cold arc appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he said, Stinking brat, do you really think you can escape? Old ancestor, that brat has already gone far away. I reckon he has already left the burial cloud mountain range. Yi Chunli said with a puzzled expression. Trash. Old ancestor Death Knight rebuked angrily and said, do I need you to remind me? Do you think I'm senile? No, I don't dare. Yi Chunli's face was pale with fright, and he quickly lowered his head. Brat, you absorbed the power of the Nine Flames Demon Lotus. Before the Lotus aura completely disappears, I can find you even if you run to the ends of the earth. Following that, old ancestor Death Knight smiled sinisterly. Then, a simple and unadorned black compass appeared in his hand. Chapter 22:39. The Dead Knight Patriarch looked at the Nine Hearts Luopan in his hand and smiled coldly. He had long since sensed that Nie Tian had absorbed the power of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus not long ago. Before the Lotus aura completely disappeared, the Nine Hearts Luopan could sense Nie Tian's location. You're so wise, Patriarch, Yi Chunli said, his eyes burning with eagerness. However, Patriarch Dead Knight didn't pay any attention to him. As a thought entered his mind, he started controlling the Nine Hearts compass to locate Nie Tian. Meanwhile, in a secluded valley in the Burial Cloud Mountains, a silver-haired figure appeared. It was none other than Nie Tian. Phew! After entering the valley and making sure there was no one else around, Nie Tian let out a long breath of turbid air and relaxed a bit. Recalling what had just happened, Nie Tian couldn't help but chuckle. We finally escaped. He hadn't expected that Anya Minjia would almost fight with the Dead Knight Patriarch for him. Although he didn't have a good impression of Anya Minjia, he still admired the latter's strength of character. At this moment, Nie Tian recalled the scene of his battle with Yi Chunli, and he couldn't help but frown and ask, Little fatty, don't you feel that my strength has increased by too much? The battle just now had been won too easily, to the point where even he felt a little strange. Although Nie Tian had become an early-stage paramount god, his battle prowess seemed to have increased to a terrifying degree. He had estimated that his fight with Yi Chunli would most likely have ended in a Pyrrhic victory. But the truth was that he was far stronger than Yi Chunli. Nie Tian, that's how terrifying the Saint Aura is. Little Fat Cat's voice rang out as it chuckled. Your battle prowess should not have increased by so much. However, that Sage Aura will greatly improve your martial body. So your battle prowess is beyond your imagination. Nie Tian frowned, then laughed. So, it's because of the Saint Aura. He had guessed the reason, but he hadn't been sure. He really did not expect that a Sage Aura that he could not detect at all would bring him such a huge improvement. Nie Tian, the benefits of the Saint Aura are beyond your imagination. You will slowly experience it in the future. The Fat Cat smiled again, but did not explain too much. Nie Tian's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but ask, Fat, in your opinion, how does my current battle prowess compare to the peak experts of the Nine Realms? Kid, you're thinking too much. However, the Fat Cat looked annoyed and said, You are not even as strong as Xian Zongfeng now. If I encounter an expert at the peak of the God State, I'll be lucky if I don't get killed instantly. Nie Tian's face stiffened, and he was speechless. It seemed that he was too optimistic. Xian Zongfeng was considered strong among peak paramount gods, but he had yet to reach the level of a peak God State expert. There was still a gap between him and Nie Dao, Windflame Qianyu, and the others. Nie Tian couldn't even compare to Xian Zongfeng, let alone a peak God State expert. But after reaching the early paramount god level, he felt that his martial body was much stronger than before. Most importantly, with the weakening of the forbidden runes, the burden on his martial body was no longer as heavy as before. He was looking forward to the next time he used the Saint Aura to purify the forbidden runes. What kind of improvement would it bring him? Considering the time, Patriarch Dead Knight and the others should have left by now. I'll go back to the Thousand Devils Caves to take a look. Nie Tian smiled faintly as he prepared to return to the Thousand Devils Caves. The reason why he didn't leave the Burial Cloud Mountains right away was that he wanted to return to the Thousand Devils Caves. He knew that the Thousand Devils Caves was a huge treasure trove, and it would be a pity to leave just like that. Given his talent, He could easily enter any cave in the 6th level and below. There was no way he was going to miss out on such a precious opportunity. He was fairly certain that Patriarch Dead Knight and the others would assume that he had already left. Therefore, returning to the Thousand Devils Caves at this point would be completely unexpected. Are you trying to get yourself killed by going back to the Thousand Devils Caves now, moron? However, just as he was about to leave the valley, a clear voice suddenly echoed out, as though it were coming from the very fabric of space itself. "Who's there?" Yet Tion blurted, his eyes narrowing. Activating his holographic divine patterns, he sent his senses out to examine the area within 1,000 meters of him. But what surprised him was that he didn't find anything. There was no aura in the area, only deathly stillness. How is this possible? At this moment, even Little Fat Cat cried out in surprise. Judging from a voice just now, it was clearly a young woman who had spoken. In fact, she even seemed a bit mischievous. Tion could sense that the woman was right next to him, yet he couldn't sense her presence at all. The fact that she was able to get so close to him without being detected proved that she was terrifying. "Idiot, do you think you can find me with your perceptive ability? What a joke." Then, the clear voice rang out again. This time, it was filled with mockery and arrogance. "Who are you? Show yourself." Tion frowned and growled. Then, countless sword silhouettes gushed out of his body. Like a giant net, they enveloped the entire valley. If the woman was in the valley, she would have been touched by the sword silhouettes, and Tion would have sensed her. Normally speaking, those who lurked would only hide themselves and not truly disappear. However, at this moment, a very strange scene appeared before Tion's eyes. Sword silhouettes filled every corner of the valley, yet there was nothing out of the ordinary. There was no one in the valley at all. How is this possible? This strange scene made Tion's pupils constrict. He was shocked. That voice was clearly nearby, yet the person wasn't in the valley. This was too strange. "Idiot, your methods are too low. You want to force me to show myself? In your dreams." Then, the clear voice rang out again, sounding even more arrogant. "Tion, this person is hiding in space. She has become one with space." Fat Cat came to her senses and reminded Tion. Tion frowned when he heard Fat Cat's words. Then, his lips curled into a strange smile. Then, he smiled faintly and said in a loud voice, "Miss, since you say that my methods are low, I will use another method." As soon as he finished speaking, a ball of flames appeared in his palm. It was the first demon fire, which was separated from the chaotic flame. The boundary of the universe. The boundary of the universe. A surprised voice rang out in the air, filled with unconcealable panic. "Little girl, you know what's good for you." Tion laughed. Then, with a thought, streams of flames surged out like thousands of fire snakes dancing in the air. The next moment, a strange scene appeared. Less than 10 meters away from Tion, the flames in the air formed a clear silhouette. Tion gasped in surprise when he saw the silhouette. His expression changed drastically. Chapter 2240. The bizarre scene caused Tion to frown and exclaim, "It's a sword shadow." He had assumed that it was a woman hiding next to him, but instead, it was a sword projection. The sword projection wasn't very large and hovered there in midair, almost as if it were floating in midair. Tion could sense a powerful space-time aura emanating from it. Even as Tion looked on in shock, a clear voice echoed out from within the sword projection. "This isn't fun," she said. "I'm not playing with you anymore." Shockingly, a violet-garbed young woman stepped out from within the sword projection. She looked very young, perhaps 18 or 19 years old. Her features were exquisite, and she was pure and charming. She was like a lotus flower rising out of the water, like a girl next door. Most shocking of all was that she was a mid-paramount god, which made her even stronger than Tion. Tion was certain that she really was 18 or 19 years old, and not just because she looked young. A mid-paramount god who was 18 or 19 years old was completely freakish. Next, something even more shocking happened in Tion. Just as the purple-clothed girl took a step forward, an extremely strange sword momentum surged out from her body. It circulated in the space, seeming to exist and not exist, as if it had merged with the space. Elementary, sword, and martial arts fusion. Nietian could sense the level of the young woman's Tao of the sword, and his eyes went wide with shock. Not only was this young woman a mid-paramount god, but she also had the elementary sword and martial arts fusion cultivation base. That level of strength matched up with her age. This young woman in violet had shocking talent. Nietian went blank for a moment, unable to come to his senses for a long time. When the young woman saw Nietian's reaction, her expression turned cold. "Are you stupid?" she said. "Have you never seen a beautiful woman before?" Only then did Nietian come to his senses, and he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Although this young woman wasn't bad-looking, she wasn't beautiful enough to shock the mortal world. What shocked Nietian wasn't her looks, but rather her talent. "Miss, who are you? Why did you appear here?" After calming down, Nietian asked in a deep voice. Although this purple-clothed girl had a very arrogant attitude, she didn't seem to have any hostility towards Nietian. If she really wanted to kill Nietian, she could have done it secretly. There was no need for her to show herself. At this moment, Nietian understood everything. The girl in front of him was an extremely rare swordsman. Her sword was not of the 9-elemental attribute, nor was it a 9-elemental variant attribute. Instead, it was of a space-time attribute. Generally speaking, a swordsman's sword intent belonged to the 9-element attribute, and some even had the 9-element variant attribute. However, this purple-clothed girl's sword intent was actually of the extremely rare space-time attribute. It was precisely because of this that the sword shadow she condensed could perfectly fuse with the surrounding space. The sword shadow she released was actually equivalent to a space-time door or a space-time whirlpool. Therefore, she could walk out of the sword shadow just now. Nietian had seen all kinds of swordsmen, but it was his first time encountering a space-time attribute swordsman. If there were no universe boundaries, he wouldn't even discover the sword shadow condensed by the purple-clothed girl. Space-time attribute swordsman was indeed terrifying. Nietian was very curious. Who the hell was this purple-clothed girl? Why did she find him? It seemed like the purple-clothed girl had been lurking by his side for a very long time. "Fool, if you don't want to die, then leave with this young lady obediently." The purple-clothed girl's posture was very arrogant, completely raising her neck to talk to Nietian. Her eyes were also cold and indifferent. "Little girl, just based on one sentence of yours, and you want me to leave with you? Aren't you too naive?" Nietian laughed and couldn't help being somewhat speechless. He had no understanding of the purple-clothed girl at all. Of course, it was impossible for him to leave with the latter. "My name is June Ouching, not little girl." The purple-clothed girl was very dissatisfied with the way the little girl addressed her and said her name angrily. "My name is Nietian, not fool." Nietian smiled and replied indifferently. "Nietian is Nietian. What's so great about that?" June Ouching scoffed and said, "You have no idea that your whereabouts have long been exposed. I estimate that the 3,000 Imperial Guards of the Dead Knight Empire are already on their way. It won't take long for them to arrive here." Nietian frowned slightly and said, "Why should I believe you? It's up to you whether you believe me or not." June Ouching smiled coldly. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and raised her snow-white neck high. She was so proud that she was like a little princess. "All right then, let's go our separate ways. I hope we'll meet again." Nietian smiled faintly and turned around to leave. Seeing that Nietian was really leaving, June Ouching panicked and yelled, "You idiot, come back here. Little girl, is there anything else?" Nietian turned around and looked at June Ouching with a calm smile. "You idiot, you're so stupid." June Ouching's face turned red with anger. "You just absorbed the power of the 9 Hearts Lotus. There are still traces of the Lotus aura in your body. The Dead Knight Ancestor has a 9 Hearts compass. He can sense your location at any time. If you return to the 1,000 Demons Cave now, you'll be seeking death. If you continue to stay here, you'll be waiting for death. If you don't want to seek death and don't want to wait for death, then follow me obediently." After saying this in one breath, June Ouching saw that Nye Tian was stunned. She couldn't help but feel proud and said, "How about it, big idiot? Do you want to leave with me?" After hearing June Ouching's words, Nye Tian's expression immediately became serious. The Nine Hearts Lotus, this was something he hadn't thought of. Looking at June Ouching's expression, she definitely didn't look like she was lying. "Little girl, is what you said true?" Nye Tian suddenly raised his head to look at June Ouching and asked in a deep voice, "I'm so pretty and cute. Am I the kind of person who would lie?" June Ouching's face was brimming with a proud smile as she spoke with an arrogant attitude. Nye Tian's brows tightened again, and he asked, "Little girl, let me ask you another question. What is your purpose for following me?" Seeing Nye Tian's serious expression, June Ouching couldn't help but be stunned. Her beautiful eyes flickered and she said, "I don't want to answer this question. Is that okay?" "No." Nye Tianling coldly responded with an icy gaze. Feeling Nye Tian's hostility, June Ouching suddenly froze and became anxious. She loudly shouted, "You idiot! I'm here to save you, not to kill you. What kind of attitude is this? Saving me requires a reason, doesn't it?" The corner of Nye Tian's mouth rose in a strange arc as he coldly responded. June Ouching saw that Nye Tian was very serious. Her beautiful eyes hesitated for a moment before she finally said, "Okay, since you want to know the reason, I'll tell you. I was entrusted by someone, so I came to save you." Chapter 22:41. Nye Tian heard June Ouching's words. She had been entrusted by someone to save him. He couldn't help but feel confused. Who was the person behind June Ouching? A mysterious person? Was there a relationship between June Ouching and the mysterious person? "Idiot, the people from the Dead Knight Empire are here. Let's leave this place first." But at this moment, June Ouching shouted, her expression becoming nervous. "First of all, tell me, who asked you to come here?" Nye Tian asked in a deep voice, looking very calm. He didn't sense any aura, but he knew that June Ouching didn't lie to him. June Ouching was a space-time swordsman. She was much more sensitive to any movement in space-time than ordinary people. "Idiot, do you really have to ask this question at this time?" June Ouching said snappily, looking very anxious. Then, an almost transparent sword appeared in her hand. She swung it in the air, and a space-time sword appeared. "Let's leave this place first." June Ouching turned to look at Nye Tian and said hurriedly. At that moment, there was a faint vibration in the surrounding space. It was obvious that a large group of martial artists was rushing over. However, Nye Tian looked indifferent and said calmly, "Tell me first, who asked you to save me? There's no time. Can't we talk after we leave this place?" June Ouching suddenly looked up and saw a black mass of figures in the sky. She couldn't help but sound anxious. Nye Tian also noticed the figures in the sky. They were the guards of the Dead Knight Empire. It seemed that June Ouching didn't lie to him. However, he still wanted to know who was behind June Ouching. "Tell me, who is it?" Nye Tian didn't move. His eyes were determined. "You big idiot, I promise you that after I leave this place, I will tell you everything. Is that okay?" June Ouching said hurriedly when she saw that the passing Knight Imperial Guard was about to arrive. "Sure." Nye Tian nodded and smiled. What he wanted was June Ouching's guarantee. June Ouching was stunned for a moment before she realized that Nye Tian was actually testing her. However, she had no time to be angry. The two of them stepped into the space-time sword shadow and disappeared. The moment the sword shadow disappeared, countless figures in black appeared in the sky above the valley. They were all the passing Knight Imperial Guards. A figure descended. It was the old ancestor of the Dead Knight. Yuchenli followed closely behind, but the two of them froze on the spot at the same time. At this moment, the valley was empty. There was no sign of Nye Tian. "Old ancestor, where's that kid?" Yuchenli reacted and cried out in shock. But ancestor passing Knight's face was stiff, unable to speak for a long time. The Nine Hearts compass showed that Nye Tian was clearly inside this valley. How could there be no one? Furthermore, just earlier, old ancestor passing Knight still sensed Nye Tian's aura. But in an instant, the aura disappeared. It was seriously too strange. How is this possible? Old ancestor passing night's gaze turned to the nine hearts compass, but completely could not find Yetion's shadow. He could not help crying out strangely. This kid can still disappear into thin air. How could he know that the current Yetion disappeared into thin air? Although the nine hearts compass could sense the nine hearts demonic lotus's aura, the distance was too far away. It naturally could not sense it either. The current Yetion was long already far away from the burial cloud mountain range. The nine hearts compass was useless too. Damn it! Suddenly, old ancestor passing night roared explosively. A violent force gushed out. The entire valley actually collapsed with a loud bang. Originally, he was already about to catch Yetion, but the latter disappeared inexplicably. How could this not make him furious? Yi Chenli's eyes trembled as he looked at old ancestor passing night, and only dared to speak after a long time. That kid already disappeared. Apart from leaving this place, what else can we do? Old ancestor passing night roared angrily, stomped his foot, and directly left. Yi Chenli had an ugly expression, and he was furious to the extreme in his heart. He roared solemnly, "Yetion, if I can't kill you with my own hands, I'm not Yi Chenli." At this time, his hatred for Yetion was higher than the sky and deeper than the sea. He wished that he could tear the latter's corpse into 1,000 pieces, then whip the corpse to vent his anger, and then grind the bones to dust. But unfortunately, Yetion had long fled to God knows where. At the same time, high above in the sky, at the periphery of the burial cloud mountain range, high above in the clear sky, on the surface there seemed to be nothing. But in the space, there were two figures currently sprinting with all their might. Currently, in the space, there were countless space-time sword shadows arranged in a very orderly manner. If one could see with the naked eye, one would discover that these sword shadows were separated by about 100,000 meters from each other, and they were all connected as a whole. It was like an endless passageway that led to who knew where. And two figures were currently traversing through these sword shadows rapidly. These two figures were none other than Yetion and Jun Aoqing. Yetion continuously traversed through the space-time sword shadows. For every sword shadow that disappeared, he advanced 100,000 meters. At this moment, he could not help but admire Jun Aoqing's methods. So many space-time sword shadows must have been set up beforehand. This little girl was very smart. Before finding Yetion, she had already set up a passageway to escape. After all, the Forsaken Land was formed from a fragment of the sacred world. The space-time stability was extremely high. Even if Jun Aoqing was a space-time swordsman, it was impossible for her to perform long-distance space-time movement. Each sword shadow of hers could only traverse a distance of 100,000 meters. Therefore, she could only use this seemingly stupid but actually very smart method to help her and Yetion escape quickly. After a while, after traversing through countless space-time sword shadows, Yetion and Jun Aoqing came to the outside of a thorny jungle. Okay, we're safe now. Let's take a rest. Jun Aoqing let out a long breath of turbid air and directly descended. The space-time sword shadows that she had set up only reached this point, so the two of them stopped here. Little girl, good technique. Yetion's figure descended and came to Jun Aoqing's side. He smiled faintly and praised her. Do I need you to tell me that? Jun Aoqing had a complacent look on her face, but her forehead was covered with dense beads of sweat. It seemed that traversing through so many space-time sword shadows was also a big burden for her. Just now, when she and Yetion traversed through 100 space-time sword shadows, the total distance of all the space-time sword shadows was 20,000 kilometers. In other words, she and Yetion had traversed 20,000 kilometers in just a moment. At this time, Jun Aoqing's complexion recovered a lot. Suddenly, she thought of something. Her beautiful eyes stared at Yetion and solemnly warned, "Idiot, you are not allowed to call me little girl in the future. My name is Jun Aoqing. Remember it clearly, Jun Aoqing. If you dare to call me little girl again, I will dig your eyes out." So ruthless. Yetion was speechless. He smiled and then said, "As long as you don't call me idiot, I won't call you little girl. Fair, right?" June Ouching's beautiful eyes flickered. She seemed to think for a long time, and finally nodded. Chapter 2242. Hearing Niet Tion's words, June Ouching's eyes flickered, and she asked, Niet Tion, do you really want to know? Miss June, you are so beautiful and lovely. You don't seem to be the kind of person who will break her promise. Niet Tion smiled lightly, and his eyes were firm and confident. It was only a matter of a word to deal with this kind of girl. Looking at Niet Tion, June Ouching couldn't help blushing, and then she took a deep breath and murmured, Forget it, I won't break my promise. Since I promised to tell you everything, I won't hide it from you. Niet Tion nodded and smiled, waiting for June Ouching's answer. I saved you because of my grandpa's order. June Ouching looked at Niet Tion and said seriously. And then, Niet Tion was dazed for a second and signaled June Ouching to continue. There's no then. June Ouching, on the other hand, was stunned and said, You asked me. Who asked me to save you? I've already answered you. Niet Tion was speechless, and he wanted to cry, but had no tears. June Ouching just said that she was ordered by her grandpa. What kind of answer was that? How did Niet Tion know who her grandpa was? June Ouching, who is your grandpa? Taking a deep breath, Niet Tion calmed down and then asked, Who is my grandpa? It's none of your business. Why should I tell you? June Ouching looked arrogant, and her attitude was quite arrogant. Niet Tion looked at June Ouching and swallowed his saliva. He was so angry that he was about to vomit blood. He couldn't tell whether June Ouching really didn't understand his question, or she was pretending not to understand. Why did your grandpa ask you to save me? Taking a deep breath, Niet Tion forced himself to calm down and continued to ask. This is my grandpa's business. You should ask him. June Ouching rolled her eyes and glanced at Niet Tion from the corner of her eyes. She arrogantly said, I want to see if you can really fulfill the old man's condition since Grandpa asked me to save you. Niet Tion's eyebrows furrowed as he vaguely understood something. It seemed that June Ouching's grandfather had saved him because he wanted him to do something for him. As for what it was, June Ouching knew, but she didn't say it. Also, the identity of June Ouching's grandfather made Niet Tion very puzzled. He had guessed that June Ouching's grandfather might be the mysterious man. But now he didn't think so, because if the mysterious man wanted him to do something, he could just tell him directly. There was no need to go through so much trouble. But he vaguely felt that this matter must have something to do with the mysterious man. Umph! At this time, June Ouching suddenly glared at Niet Tion and said, I don't believe that you can do something that even I can't do. June Ouching, what does your grandpa want me to do? Niet Tion smiled and asked tentatively, I'm not interested in telling you. June Ouching's eyes were arrogant, and she said directly, When you reach Cloud Valley Sacred Sky, you will naturally know. Niet Tion was speechless. This little girl's attitude was quite good just now. Why did she suddenly turn gloomy? Then, June Ouching rested for half a day. Her strength was almost recovered, so she stood up and said, Let's go. Okay. Niet Tion didn't refuse. He was also very curious about what was waiting for him next. With the help of June Ouching's space-time sword shadow, June Ouching and Niet Tion advanced at a very fast speed. About half a day later, the two arrived at the edge of a continuous mountain range. We're here. June Ouching looked down at the continuous mountain range, and her little face finally showed a hint of joy. Is this the Cloud Valley, Sagely Heaven? Niet Tion looked down and smiled faintly. The mountain range below them was very high above sea level. All the mountains, except for a few peaks, were all shrouded in thick clouds. The entire mountain range was shrouded in layers of clouds and churning mists, giving off a mysterious and sacred feeling. No wonder this place was called Cloud Valley Sacred Sky. Yes, June Ouching nodded proudly. Then, she moved and said, Follow me. Niet Tion followed closely behind June Ouching, and the two came directly to the ground. Follow behind me. Don't run around. June Ouching looked back at Niet Tion cautiously. Niet Tion looked around and didn't find anything suspicious. Instead, he saw a few majestic mountains halfway up the mountain. They seemed to belong to some sect. After a while, Jun Aoqing and Nie Tian arrived at the foot of a mountain. In front of them were two huge stone pillars with dragon carvings. They were thousands of meters tall and looked like pillars that reached into the sky. In the middle of the two stone pillars was a small stone door. Contrasted against the stone pillars, it looked very small. "Come on," Jun Aoqing said faintly, and was about to enter the stone door. "Wait." However, at that moment, a deep voice suddenly came from the sky, following which several figures descended along the two stone pillars with dragon carvings. Tian frowned slightly as he looked at the figures. Clearly, they had been hiding on the stone pillars the entire time. It seemed they were waiting for Tian and Jun Aoqing to arrive. Tian's eyes flickered as he looked at them. All of them were sword users and were extremely powerful. All of them were paramount gods. That was especially true of the leader. He wore a white robe and looked very young, but he was definitely under 10,000 years old. However, he was already a late paramount god and had reached the pinnacle of the Tao of the sword. There was no doubt that he was a genius in the Tao of the sword. Tian could sense an intense coldness coming from him, so he deduced that he was a rare ice-type sword cultivator. Jun Aoqing obviously recognized the white-robed man. Her eyes flashed, and she said in a cold voice, "Ling Hanfeng, it's you." "That's right, it's me." Ling Hanfeng smiled coldly. His eyes swept over Jun Aoqing, and there was an undisguised lust in them. He laughed and said, "Miss Aoqing, I haven't seen you for a year, and you've grown even more beautiful. Whether I'm beautiful or not has nothing to do with you. Get out of the way." Jun Aoqing hated Ling Hanfeng very much and directly scolded him. "Miss Aoqing, what's the hurry? We haven't seen each other for a year. Shouldn't we have a good chat?" Ling Hanfeng obviously had no intention of getting out of the way. He laughed and moved closer to Jun Aoqing. The corner of his mouth curled up into a rippling smile. A pair of greedy eyes wandered unscrupulously over Jun Aoqing's body. "Ling Hanfeng, you're shameless." Jun Aoqing looked at Ling Hanfeng and scolded. She was very disgusted. "Miss Aoqing, I didn't do anything. How am I shameless?" Ling Han smiled wanly and said, "Is it Lady Ao Qing who wishes for me to become shameless?" Ling Hanfeng, you... Jun Aoqing frowned, and her delicate face suddenly became red. She was so angry that she couldn't speak. Ling Hanfeng looked at Jun Aoqing and laughed. He wanted to say something, but he saw a figure directly step over. Chapter 2243. Tian stared coldly at Ling Hanfeng. His eyes were as cold as ice and filled with killing intent. Ling Hanfeng looked at Tian and was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed wildly and said, "Kid, you're the guy that Lord invited, right? I thought you would be an earth-shattering swordsman. But now, it seems that I was completely wrong. Early-stage paramount god with the elementary unity of sword and martial. In the Sacred Heaven Sword League, calling someone like you trash is already flattering you." Ling Hanfeng's words immediately caused the people behind him to burst into laughter. Lord sent Miss Jun Aoqing to save someone. But who would have thought that the person she saved would be trash? A trash that only has the elementary unity of sword and martial wants to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal? What a joke. The Sacred Heaven Sword Seal is a powerful existence. None of the 100 million Wan Jiandao geniuses in the Sacred Heaven Sword League could break it. Can this white-haired trash do it? They laughed arrogantly and directly regarded Tian as trash. Tian didn't have much of a reaction when he heard their words. He only frowned slightly. He seemed to have understood something. The place he was currently at should be called the Sacred Heaven Sword League, and Jun Aoqing's grandfather should be the Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword League. It was this Lord who sent Jun Aoqing to save him, and the reason for saving him seemed to be to let him break a sword seal, the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. From their words, Tian could tell that the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was a very powerful sword intent seal. No one in the entire Sacred Heaven Sword League could break it. No wonder Jun Aoqing looked at Tian with a strange gaze and said something like how Tian could do something that even she couldn't. It seemed that June Ouching had also tried to break the sacred Heaven Sword Seal, but failed. From the looks of it, the sacred Heaven Sword Seal was extremely important to the sacred Heaven Sword Alliance. Otherwise, the Alliance Master wouldn't have spent so much effort to save Nietian. It was just that Nietian himself was a little doubtful. Such a powerful sword seal, could he break it? Then, he became much calmer, and his gaze landed on Ling Hanfeng. There was no need to worry about the sacred Heaven Sword Seal. He should deal with this arrogant fool first. Brat, are you very unconvinced? Ling Hanfeng could feel the coldness in Nietian's eyes, and he laughed maniacally and arrogantly. Nietian frowned, but ignored Ling Hanfeng. Instead, he looked towards June Ouching and asked, June Ouching, do you know him? June Ouching didn't know what Nietian wanted to do. She nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. Of course Miss Ouching knows me. I'm her fiancé. At this time, Ling Hanfeng laughed, looked at June Ouching with a wretched look, and said loudly, Ling Hanfeng, don't talk nonsense. Hearing Ling Hanfeng's words, June Ouching panicked. Her pretty face was as red as a ripe apple, and she hurriedly said, You and your father only proposed to my grandfather, but my grandfather didn't agree at all. So what if he didn't agree? Ling Hanfeng's eyes suddenly turned cold. He stared straight at June Ouching and said darkly, June Ouching, don't worry. I'll propose to you every year until the Alliance Master agrees. Ling Hanfeng, you're shameless. June Ouching was so angry that her little face trembled and her eyes became moist. A year ago, Ling Hanfeng had proposed to her, but her grandfather didn't agree at all. Who would have thought that Ling Hanfeng would be so shameless and announce everywhere that he was June Ouching's fiancé? She was just a little girl, so of course she couldn't keep her face. She had mentioned this matter to her grandfather many times, but the latter was helpless and could only turn a blind eye to it. Although June Ouching's grandfather was the Alliance Master of the Sacred Heaven Sword League, there were some things that he couldn't do anything about. The Sacred Heaven Sword League was jointly established by the 7 major sword sects in the Abandoned Land. The Alliance Master had to consider the 7 major sword sects in everything he did. Ling Hanfeng's identity was very special. He was the son of the High Wind Sword Sect's sect master. The High Wind Sword Sect was one of the 7 major sword sects in the Sacred Heaven Sword League. It was only weaker than the Rakshasa Sword Sect. If not for this, Ling Hanfeng wouldn't have dared to propose to June Ouching. At this moment, Nietian looked at June Ouching and asked indifferently, June Ouching, you mean that there's no relationship between you and this guy, right? Yes, there's no relationship. June Ouching nodded her head heavily and said firmly, Since that's the case, then it's easy. Nietian smiled faintly and turned to look at Ling Hanfeng. His expression was cold and murderous. Ling Hanfeng sensed the murderous intent in Nietian's eyes and couldn't help but frown as he asked in a cold tone, Brat, what do you want? Ling Hanfeng, I'll give you a chance. Nietian smiled faintly and said, Apologize to June Ouching immediately and disappear from my sight. Can you do that? What? Ling Hanfeng was stunned for a moment, as if he suspected that he had misheard. He pointed at his ears arrogantly and said, My ears aren't very good. What did you just say? Say it again. Ha ha ha, this brat must be an idiot. He actually dares to threaten third young master. The others laughed arrogantly and looked at Nietian as if they were looking at an idiot. Ling Hanfeng was the 3rd son of the Cloud-Soaring Sword sect leader, so they called him third young master. June Ouching's beautiful eyes flashed. She hadn't expected Nietian to say such a thing. In her opinion, Nietian was indeed a talented swordsman. However, she felt that Nietian definitely wasn't a match for Ling Hanfeng. When she had found Nietian earlier, the duel between him and Yi Chunli had already ended. Therefore, she hadn't seen Nietian fight, so she didn't know much about Nietian's true battle prowess. However, she was very familiar with Ling Hanfeng's strength. Ling Hanfeng was a late-stage paramount god who had reached the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. On top of that, his sword intent was of the frost attribute. Therefore, even a peak paramount god wouldn't be a match for him. Nietion only had the strength of an early-stage paramount god. How could he possibly be a match for Ling Hanfeng? You don't have good ears, do you? At this time, Nietion suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. He suddenly took a step forward and said coldly, "Since you don't have good ears, then don't take them." Swoosh! The moment his cold voice fell, a sword intent whistled out. It was so fast that it couldn't be blinked. Ling Hanfeng only saw a flash of sword light in front of him, and then he felt a tearing pain in his ear. Ah, my ear! In the next moment, he reacted instantly. He covered his ear with one hand, but all he felt was a warm wetness. His ear had been directly cut off by Nietion. Third young master this. The other swordsmen were also shocked. When they came to their senses, they all sucked in a breath of cold air. They didn't know what to say. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Nietion would dare to attack directly. And his attack was so frightening. "Bastard! How dare you sneak attack me?" Ling Hanfeng roared angrily. His entire body's sword aura rose. Following that, streaks of frigid sword intent were released. The surrounding space seemed to have fallen into an ice cellar. Ling Hanfeng's eyes were filled with rage and murderous intent. Chapter 2244. Ling Hanfeng's ear was cut off by Nietion, and he was instantly enraged. His eyes were filled with killing intent, and his entire body's sword intent burst out like a raging wave. His sword intent was of a very special attribute. It was an extremely rare ice attribute, and it also contained a trace of wind attribute. In the instant that his sword intent was released, the surrounding temperature suddenly dropped, as if it had become an ice cellar. In the air, one could clearly see ice shards flying everywhere. "Bastard, die!" The next moment, Ling Hanfeng roared, and an ice sword appeared in his hand, which he slashed out. Instantly, the ice sword intent in the air condensed and turned into a giant ice sword that was thousands of meters long. Like an ice mountain, it directly pressed down on Nietion. "Be careful!" June Ouching saw this, and her face stiffened as she screamed in fear. The few people behind Ling Hanfeng had already retreated to the side and looked at Nietion passionately, as if they could already see the tragic scene of the latter being smashed into meat paste. "With this kind of strength, you dare to be arrogant in front of me. You're really looking for death." However, at this moment, Nietion only laughed coldly. There was no fear in his eyes, only anger and killing intent. Since Ling Hanfeng wanted to kill him, he obviously wouldn't just wait for death. He stood where he was, his figure like a mountain. His body suddenly shook, and black runes appeared all over his body. His aura instantly rose to the extreme. Proud sword frenzy kill. Then he roared, and the star heaven slash appeared in his hand. In the air he stabbed out. Sword intent surged out like a roaring ocean, rolling and roaring. Kaboom! Crack, crack, crack. The next moment, the giant ice sword in the air was hit, and with a loud bang, it directly shattered, turning into ice cones that filled the sky and scattered in the air. Ah! Ling Hanfeng was shocked by the scene in the air and instantly cried out in fear. However, in the next moment, a violent wave of air directly pressed down, and his whole body was sent flying. Pong! Ling Hanfeng flew thousands of meters in the air and finally landed. He couldn't stand still and directly fell down. Third young master. The other swordsmen were stunned by the scene before them. They finally reacted and cried out in unison. June Ouching was even more stunned. Her petite face froze in shock, and her pair of beautiful eyes flickered as she stared at Nietion with a look of utter disbelief. She was originally worried that Nietion would be injured by Ling Hanfeng. However, she did not expect that Nietion's strength was beyond her imagination. Impossible! And at this moment, Ling Hanfeng suddenly roared and jumped up from the ground. There was blood at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were like those of a venomous wolf, shining with a cold and sinister light. "You can still stand up?" When Nietion saw this, the corner of his mouth twitched. He smiled coldly and said, "It seems that the sword just now was not strong enough." In the clash of swords, Ling Hanfeng was only injured, but not severely injured. This was not because his martial body was strong and his strength was strong, but because Niet Tian had held back. Just now, Jun Ouching was too close, so Niet Tian did not dare to use too much strength for fear of hurting her. Moreover, he was not very clear what Ling Hanfeng's identity was. If he acted rashly, he was afraid that he would attract unnecessary trouble. "Little bastard, you've angered me." Ling Hanfeng let out a fierce roar, and his eyes turned crimson. A terrifying sword intent surged around his body and actually caused the surrounding space to be covered with a faint layer of frost. Third young master. When the other swordsmen saw this, their faces turned pale and they were speechless. Oh no, he's going to use the power of his bloodline. At the same time, Jun Ouching's face also trembled, and she cried out in shock. Ling Hanfeng was not only strong, but also had a powerful bloodline in his body. "Niet Tian, let's go." Jun Ouching reacted, turned around, and formed a space-time sword shadow with her sword. She hurriedly shouted to Niet Tian, "Jun Ouching, step back." Niet Tian smiled faintly and waved his hand to signal Jun Ouching to step back. There was a cold and evil smile on the corner of his mouth, looking sinister and disdainful. "Niet Tian, you." Jun Ouching was stunned and very anxious. She felt that Niet Tian did not know how strong the power of Ling Hanfeng's bloodline was. If the two of them fought to the death, Niet Tian would be at a great disadvantage. Her mission was to bring Niet Tian to the leader of the Sword Alliance. Of course, she did not want anything to happen to Niet Tian. Moreover, Niet Tian seemed to be fighting for her, which made her even more worried. "Don't worry." Niet Tian turned to look at Jun Ouching and said faintly, "I'm very strong." His calm voice stunned Jun Ouching. She could feel the domineering confidence in Niet Tian's eyes. It seemed that Niet Tian did not take Ling Hanfeng seriously at all. In reality, that was indeed the case. Ling Hanfeng's strength was indeed not weak, but he was still far from being arrogant in front of Niet Tian. Even though Ling Hanfeng had activated the power of his bloodline, his aura was still far from Yichenli's. With Niet Tian's strength, he could even easily crush Yichenli. How could he be afraid of Ling Hanfeng? "Little bastard, go and die." At this moment, Ling Hanfeng's ruthless voice sounded. Then his aura soared to the extreme, and he stabbed out with his sword. An ice sword, like a giant dragon, whizzed out and pressed straight towards Niet Tian. Whoa! The moment the giant ice sword appeared, the surrounding space suddenly tightened, as if letting out a low wail. Niet Tian felt the cold air rushing towards him, but his eyes were extremely determined. There was no fear, but a hint of mockery. Since Ling Hanfeng wanted play, then Niet Tian would play with him. Godly sword. Without hesitation, Niet Tian stabbed out with his sword. On top of the starry heaven slash, the sword light shone brightly, and a starry sword shadow rushed out. With a roar, it was like an ancient giant beast that swallowed everything. Sensing the powerful aura from Niet Tian's sword shadows, the others sucked in a breath of cold air at the same time, and their expressions suddenly changed. Boom! The next moment, the two giant swords collided, and the air suddenly shook. Then, the giant ice sword directly shattered, turned into ice shards, and disappeared in the air. No! Ling Hanfeng's eyes trembled, and he suddenly felt the terrifying sword shadow attack him. He was so scared that he screamed, and his whole body froze on the spot. Never in his wildest dreams had he ever imagined that Niet Tian was actually this powerful. At the same time, Niet Tian laughed coldly. The sword's shadow in the air whizzed past, and actually flew past the top of Ling Hanfeng's head. Ling Hanfeng's whole body froze, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. His spine and tailbone were cold, and his teeth kept chattering. Obviously, he was frightened. "Third young master, are you okay?" The others were stunned for a long time, and then immediately reacted and came to Ling Hanfeng's side. I'm not dead." Ling Hanfeng finally reacted, his voice trembling, and his tense nerves instantly collapsed. And at this moment, he felt heat between his legs, and then the air was filled with the smell of urine. Chapter 22:45. Oomph. Your courage is nothing compared to your arrogance. Nie Tian glanced at Ling Hanfeng with disdain and sneered. Ling Hanfeng was so scared that he peed his pants. This was something that even Nie Tian was surprised about. This guy was so arrogant just now that he wished he could walk on 3 legs. Now he was actually so scared. The change before and after was nauseating. This kind of coward still had the face to propose marriage to Jun Ouching every year. He was really shameless. Nie Tian, don't kill him. At this moment, Jun Ouching reacted and quickly stepped forward to stop Nie Tian. She thought that after Nie Tian defeated Ling Hanfeng, he would kill the latter. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "If I wanted to kill him, would he still be able to stand up?" From the beginning, he didn't plan to kill Ling Hanfeng. He just wanted to teach the latter a lesson. He had just arrived at the Sacred Heaven Sword League and didn't know who Ling Hanfeng was. If he killed him rashly, it would be very troublesome. Jun Ouching looked at Nie Tian in surprise, and her eyes slowly changed. At this moment, she realized that Nie Tian was far more terrifying than she had expected. Maybe he really can break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. At a certain moment, a thought suddenly appeared in Jun Ouching's mind, but it dimmed in the blink of an eye. She thought, even I can't break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. How can he? Although she said this in her mind, her impression of Nie Tian had changed a lot. At this moment, Nie Tian took a step forward and directly came to Ling Hanfeng's side. What do you want? Ling Hanfeng was so scared that his face was as white as paper. He didn't even dare to look up at Nie Tian. Ling Hanfeng, you still haven't apologized to Jun Ouching. Nie Tian said with a calm face, a faint smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. Ling Hanfeng's face stiffened, and he was extremely embarrassed. What, you're not willing? Nie Tian laughed, and his face instantly darkened. His eyes were like a wolf's as he stared at Ling Hanfeng. Willing, I'm willing. Ling Hanfeng was so frightened that his body trembled, and he said repeatedly. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said calmly, if you're willing to apologize, then apologize. Miss Ouching, everything before was my fault. I'm sorry. Ling Hanfeng bowed slightly towards Jun Ouching, his eyes no longer daring to look around as he said in a low voice. Your voice is too soft. I can't hear you. Nie Tian frowned and said loudly. At this time, Jun Ouching had already come to Nie Tian's side. She quietly tugged at him, hinting that it was enough. Miss Ao-Ching, everything is my fault. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Ling Hanfeng swallowed his saliva and hurriedly raised his voice. That's more like it. Nie Tian smiled in satisfaction and then said, Ling Hanfeng, then in the future, do you still want to propose marriage to Jun Ouching? I don't dare anymore. Ling Hanfeng waved his hands repeatedly, and his body subconsciously retreated. But his eyes were extremely vicious, and he was thinking about how to take revenge. Jun Ouching looked at Nie Tian and felt a warmth flow through her heart, and her face involuntarily blushed. Io. However, at this time, a sharp and mocking voice suddenly sounded, and then a figure descended and appeared in front of Nie Tian and the others. Nie Tian's gaze slightly focused, and he looked at that figure. It was a man, but he was very flirtatious. His clothes were actually pink, and his lips were painted with thick lipstick. He held a pink handkerchief in his hand, and was covering his mouth as he laughed, his charming eyes staring at everyone. Ling Hanfeng, aren't you usually quite manly? Why are you so cowardly today? You've been beaten to such a state, the man in pink said. His voice was soft, and it sounded very cloying. You damned lady boy. Shut up. Ling Hanfeng was immediately angered by the man in pink's mockery and reprimanded him wildly. Io, you've been beaten by someone. Why are you getting angry at me? The man in pink screamed, his face full of dissatisfaction. Nie Tian, who was at the side, really wanted to vomit. He turned around and said to Jun Ouching, let's go. Jun Ouching nodded and prepared to leave. Wait. But at this time, the man in pink laughed coldly and stared at Nie Tian with his small eyes. With a provocative expression, he said, You're the person that Lord Alliance leader found, right? So what if I am? Nie Tianling replied coldly. He really couldn't stand a man in Pink's voice. If he heard it too much, he would definitely have nightmares. Nie Tian, his name is Luo Sanfeng, and he's the son of the Rakshasa Sword Sect's sect master. The Rakshasa Sword Sect is the strongest among the 7 major sword sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance. Jun Aoqing seemed to be worried that Nie Tian would do something bad, so she transmitted a message to him. The Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance was formed by the 7 major sword sections. The Rakshasa Sword Sect was the strongest, and Luo Sanfeng was the 3rd son of the sect master. Ling Hanfeng belonged to the Lingyun Sword Sect, and the Lingyun Sword Sect was second only to the Rakshasa Sword Sect. Nie Tian nodded slightly. Of course, he knew what Jun Aoqing was worried about, so he transmitted a message. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Io, you brat. You're quite blunt with your words. I like it. Luo Sanfeng covered her mouth and laughed, and she actually winked at Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he immediately retched, almost vomiting. The lethality of this guy's winking was too strong, and ordinary people really couldn't bear it. If you don't have anything else, please step aside. Nie Tian really couldn't stand Luo Sanfeng, so he directly said, Of course there's something. Luo Sanfeng smiled charmingly. She actually swayed her small waist and walked over. Her eyes stared straight at Nie Tian, and she said, Little handsome, you just came to the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, so you must be very unfamiliar with this place. Why don't you let me accompany you and help you familiarize yourself with this place? Nie Tian frowned and endured the disgust in his chest. He said cold, No need. Then, he directly pulled Jun Aoqing and prepared to leave. Io. However, at this moment, Luo Sanfeng screamed, and her eyes instantly became cold. She said sternly, Brat, I'm willing to accompany you, and that's giving you face. Don't be ungrateful. Ling Hanfeng and the others saw this scene, and their eyes couldn't help but heat up as if they were looking forward to something. They knew that Luo Sanfeng's strength was very terrifying. From the point of view of men and women, Luo Sanfeng was indeed very strange. However, her strength was extremely terrifying. Among the entire younger generation of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, Luo Sanfeng's strength could definitely be ranked in the top 10. If Luo Sanfeng and Nie Tian fought, it would be very exciting. Seeing that Luo Sanfeng was angry, Jun Aoqing's face couldn't help but sink, and a worried expression appeared on her face. I'm sorry, I like to be ungrateful. Nie Tian turned around and said cold to Luo Sanfeng. Chapter 2246. Luo Sanfeng's eyes were as cold as ice and filled with hostility, giving off a strong sense of oppression. Nie Tian looked at Luo Sanfeng and said, Whether I have the strength or not, we'll know after we try. At this moment, he decided not to endure it anymore. This Luo Sanfeng was obviously looking for trouble. If Nie Tian continued to endure it, he would become sick. Challenge me. Luo Sanfeng's eyes trembled, and the hostility in her eyes intensified. In the entire Sacred Heaven Sword Union, there were not many people who dared to challenge her. Nie Tian. Jun Aoqing was very nervous at this moment and subconsciously pulled Nie Tian. She knew that Luo Sanfeng's strength was far beyond Ling Hanfeng's. Nie Tian could defeat Ling Hanfeng, but it didn't mean that he could defeat Luo Sanfeng. It's fine, trust me. Nie Tian smiled faintly and signaled Jun Aoqing to step back. Jun Aoqing looked at Nie Tian's eyes and felt the strong confidence in the latter's eyes. Her heart couldn't help but tremble. She had never seen such a confident look. It was hard to imagine that a person's eyes could be so confident, especially when Nie Tian's strength was far below Luo Sanfeng's. Sister Aoqing, the next battle will be very fierce. It's better for you to step back. At this moment, Luo Sanfeng's eyes swept across Jun Aoqing and laughed. If I hurt you later, my second brother will not be happy. Luo Sanfeng, don't talk nonsense. Whether I get hurt or not has nothing to do with Luo Eru. Jun Aoqing roared with an angry face. Sister Aoqing, don't say that. Luo Sanfeng smiled charmingly. If my second brother hears this, he will be hurt. My second brother said that in this lifetime, he will only marry you. Luo Sanfeng, shut up. Jun Aoqing shouted angrily. She wanted to personally tear Luo Sanfeng's mouth. Nietan, who was watching from the side, already understood. It seemed like Ling Hanfeng wasn't the only one in the Sacred Heavensword Alliance who had taken a fancy to Jun Aoqing. Without waiting for Luo Sanfeng to speak again, Nietan took a step forward and said coldly, "His ears aren't working, and it seems like your mouth isn't working either. Should I give you treatment?" Stinking brat, you dare to say that this old lady's mouth isn't working? You're courting death. Luo Sanfeng roared, and a flexible sword appeared in her hand, releasing a sinister sword intent. A person who likes to fart has a fart mouth. Isn't that useless? Yet Tianling laughed, his eyes cold and contemptuous. You have a sharp tongue. You're courting death. Luo Sanfeng couldn't bear it any longer. With a low roar, the flexible sword in her hand stabbed out diagonally. Suddenly, a black sword shadow whistled out, attacking Nietan. That sword shadow was very strange. There were actually black runes surging on it, looking like many small black snakes. It was extremely terrifying. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. In midair, the dark sword shadow morphed into a huge black snake, which opened its bloody mouth and bared its fangs. Then, it pounced towards Nietan with a sinister look, as if it was going to swallow Nietan whole. Interesting. Facing the giant black snake, the corner of Nietan's mouth twitched. Immediately, his body shook, and a crimson sea of lightning appeared behind him. The majestic dragon aura instantly filled the space within a radius of 10,000 meters. Roar! In the next moment, in the crimson sea of lightning, a giant crimson dragon appeared and roared at the sky, like thunder from the nine heavens. So powerful, Ling Hanfeng and the others had already retreated tens of thousands of meters away. When they saw the giant crimson dragon from afar and felt the mighty dragon aura in the space, they exclaimed in unison. How could they have ever imagined that Nietan would be able to unleash such terrifying dragon aura? Only now did Ling Hanfeng realize that the gap between him and Nietan wasn't just 1 or 2 points, but millions and millions of points. Just now, Nietan had clearly held back. Otherwise, even if Ling Hanfeng had 1,000 lives, he would have long since been dead. Rumble. Just then, the crimson dragon rose up into the air, its dragon aura rumbling and roaring. Even the space around it seemed to be trembling. Nietan's eyes widened in surprise. This was his first time using the Paragon Dragon Meridian since becoming a paramount god. Not even he could have guessed that the Dragon Meridian would be this strong. The power of the Paragon Dragon bloodline is several times stronger than before. Such a huge improvement must have something to do with the Saint Chi. Nietan speculated, his eyes filled with joy. Fat Cat had said that the Sage Aura would bring great benefits to Nietan. This was the second time Nietan had tasted the benefits of the Sage Aura. Not only did the Sage Aura greatly improve his martial body, but it also improved his Paragon Dragon Meridian. Rumble. In the next moment, the Black Serpent and the Crimson Dragon collided head-on. A deafening explosion rang out, and boundless power surged out, wreaking havoc in the space. The giant black snake only lasted for a split second before it crumbled into pieces. The Crimson Dragon tumbled down toward Luo Sanfeng like a mountain. Ah! Luo Sanfeng shrieked when she sensed the danger. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable fear. But at this moment, the Crimson Dragon suddenly raised its head, and its body rolled up into the sky, soaring straight into the clouds. Luo Sanfeng was stunned. She looked up at the Crimson Dragon with a blank expression on her face. Whoosh! At that moment, there was a piercing sound in the air, and the shadow of a sword flew past. Before Luo Sanfeng could react, he felt a heart-wrenching pain coming from the corner of his mouth. Ah! He screamed. Only then did he realize that the corner of his mouth had been torn open, and blood had dyed half of his face red. The wound on his face had split open from the corner of his mouth to his cheeks. It looked terrifying. Luo Sanfeng suddenly understood. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he couldn't speak clearly. He had never thought that Nie Tian would actually tear half of his mouth open with a sword. This method was too vicious. At that moment, Ling Hanfeng and the others were completely stunned. They looked at Nie Tian with trembling eyes, not knowing how to express the shock in their hearts. How could they have imagined that such a powerful Luo Sanfeng would be defeated by Nie Tian just like that? And everyone could tell that Nie Tian didn't want to kill Luo Sanfeng. Otherwise, Luo Sanfeng wouldn't even have a corpse left. Just like with Ling Hanfeng, Nie Tian just wanted to teach Luo Sanfeng a lesson. A little worm wants to fight a dragon? What joke? Nie Tianling looked at Luo Sanfeng coldly and said in a low voice, I ripped your mouth open to give you a reminder. Chapter 22:47. Luo Sanfeng stood rooted to the ground, looking at Nie Tian with trembling eyes, his eyes full of disbelief. He had never dreamed that Nie Tian would be so terrifying. How can an early-stage paramount god, whose sword Dao was only at the elementary unity of sword and martial arts, have such terrifying power in his body? Nie Tian had defeated him without even using his sword. That surging draconic energy completely crushed Luo Sanfeng. Speaking of which, Luo Sanfeng wasn't weak at all. In fact, he was very strong. He was a late-stage paramount god, at the peak of the unity of sword and martial arts, but his overall battle prowess was far stronger than Ling Hanfeng's. Unfortunately, Luo Sanfeng's aura was still a bit weaker than Yi Chenli's, who was at the same level as him. If Nie Tian could crush Yi Chenli, then he could crush Luo Sanfeng too. Luo Sanfeng looked at Nie Tian, his eyes filled with shock. Only now did he realize that the one who didn't know how to appreciate favors wasn't Nie Tian, but him, Nie Tian. Jun Aoqing was stunned for a long time before she finally reacted. She came to Nie Tian's side and called out to him, then looked at Luo Sanfeng and Ling Hanfeng, seemingly very sympathetic. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng, one had his ear cut off by Nie Tian, and the other had his mouth torn open by Nie Tian. Both were very tragic. Wasn't Nie Tian's method a bit cruel? Nie Tian's gaze swept over Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng, but he was very calm. His method looked very bloody, but it was actually very merciful. His strength crushed Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng, but he only taught them a small lesson. He didn't kill them, and he didn't even seriously injure them. If this wasn't merciful, then what was? If it were either Ling Hanfeng or Luo Sanfeng, as long as they could defeat Nie Tian, they would probably kill Nie Tian without hesitation. Jun Aoqing, let's go. Nie Tian didn't want to waste any more time. He turned to look at Jun Aoqing and said with a faint smile. Jun Aoqing nodded slightly. The way she looked at Nie Tian had obviously changed. At this moment, the thought that had flashed through her mind gradually became clear. She vaguely felt that perhaps Nie Tian was the one who could break the sacred Heaven Sword seal. If the sacred Heaven Sword seal could be broken, it would be great news for the entire sacred Heaven Sword Union. The sacred Heaven Sword Union had been established for millions of years, and countless genius swordsmen had tried to break the sacred Heaven Sword seal, but they all failed without exception. Now, the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance's Alliance Master had spent a lot of effort to find Nie Tian. Could he break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal? Jun Aoqing didn't know how her grandfather knew about Nie Tian, but she started to feel that her grandfather's decision was correct. Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing didn't hesitate and directly stepped into the stone door between the two stone pillars. As soon as the two of them entered the stone door, they disappeared. This stone gate was a space-time gate that led directly to the Sacred Heaven Sword Union's territory. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng watched as Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing left, not daring to move. A long time after Nie Tian and Luo Sanfeng's figures disappeared, the two of them let out a long sigh. Their nervous expressions instantly turned cold. Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng looked at each other, clearly resentful. However, they didn't enter the stone door and directly left. The Rakshasa sword sect and Ling Yun's sword sect weren't in the Cloud Valley Sacred Sky, but somewhere else. The Cloud Valley Sacred Sky was the headquarters of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. There was only one sword sect here, and that was the Sacred Heaven Sword Sect. The reason why Ling Hanfeng and Luo Sanfeng appeared here was obviously to test the waters. The result of this test infuriated the two of them. When they returned to their respective sects, they would naturally report everything here to their sect masters. Soon, people from all the major sword sects would gather in the Cloud Valley Sacred Sky. At the same time, Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing's figures appeared in a huge square. Nie Tian looked back at the stone door beside him and said with a faint smile, "Impressive." It was obvious that the stone door behind him was connected to the previous one. One was the entrance, and the other was the exit. "Young miss." At this moment, 4 black-robed swordsmen suddenly descended from the sky and directly surrounded Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing. Nie Tian's gaze swept across the 4 black-robed swordsmen, and he was quite surprised. These 4 were all peak paramount god experts, and they were all at the peak of the realm of sword and martial arts as one. He estimated that their strength should be similar to experts like Guiwu Guangsha, and from their actions, it seemed that their status in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union wasn't high. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so respectful to Jun Aoqing. The strength of these 4 people indirectly showed the strength of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. "Where's Grandpa?" Jun Aoqing didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. "The Lord Alliance Master is waiting in the Pure Heart Courtyard. Young miss, please follow me." One of the 4 swordsmen bowed slightly, then turned around and led the way. "Nie Tian, let's go. Don't let Grandpa wait too long." Jun Aoqing nodded slightly and looked at Nie Tian with a faint smile. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and he vaguely felt that there was some change in Jun Aoqing's eyes. But he couldn't tell what the change was exactly. Under the guidance of the 4 black-clothed swordsmen, Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing walked slowly. Along the way, everyone they met cast strange glances at Nie Tian. At the same time, some people would even whisper to each other. "I heard that the Lord Alliance Master invited an extremely talented swordsman to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. Could it be this kid?" The Lord Alliance Master asked young Miss Jun Aoqing to personally go and save him. This kid came back with young Miss Jun Aoqing, so it should be him. Am I seeing things? This kid is only at the elementary realm of sword and martial arts as one. With such talent, how can he break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal? Yeah, this kid's talent is too trash. Not to mention young Miss Jun Aoqing. He's far from even me. The crowd whispered to each other as they looked at Nie Tian with undisguised contempt. Everyone in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union knew that the Lord Alliance Master invited a swordsman to open the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. But how could they have imagined that this swordsman's talent was so poor? Compared to the other geniuses in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union, he could only be described as trash. Nie Tian heard everyone's discussion, but his expression didn't change at all. "Nie Tian, they don't know the situation. Please don't mind them," Jun Aoqing whispered, worried that Nie Tian would be angry. "I'm fine," Nie Tian said with a faint smile, his face expressionless. He had heard this kind of words too many times. If this could make him angry, he would have been angered to death. It was just that he didn't understand. Why did the Alliance Master have to make it known to everyone if he was invited? Moreover, he was extremely curious about what kind of sword seal the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was. Was it really so difficult to break it? "We're here." After a moment, the 4 black-clothed swordsmen stopped. Chapter 2248. Nie Tian, let's go. Jun Aoqing smiled faintly and took a step forward, preparing to enter the small path. However, at this time, a black-robed swordsman stepped forward and stopped Jun Aoqing. He said respectfully, "Young lady, the Alliance leader has ordered that only young Master Nie Tian is allowed to see him." "What?" Jun Aoqing was stunned for a moment, and then shouted as if she had heard wrongly, "Grandpa doesn't want to see me." "Yes." The black-robed swordsman nodded slightly in a very respectful manner. "Impossible. You must be lying to me. Grandpa won't see me." Jun Aoqing's face sank as she said coldly. In her heart, Her grandpa loved her the most. How could he not see her? Young lady, this is the Alliance leader's special order. Please don't make things difficult for this subordinate. The black-robed swordsman bowed slightly and said solemnly. June Ouching's beautiful eyes flickered. She still wanted to say something, but was stopped by Nye Tian. June Ouching, since the Alliance leader wants to see me alone, you'll have to bear with it for now. Nye Tian looked at June Ouching and said faintly, All right. June Ouching frowned and finally nodded. The four black-robed swordsmen were stunned when they saw this scene. They then raised their heads and looked at Nye Tian with a strange expression. They knew that June Ouching was a very arrogant girl and very willful. Sometimes, even the Alliance leader couldn't control her. But now, June Ouching was actually willing to listen to Nye Tian. This was too unbelievable. Young Master Nye Tian, please. Then, one of the black-robed swordsmen gestured for Nye Tian to enter. Nye Tian nodded slightly and glanced at June Ouching before walking into the small path. June Ouching looked at Nye Tian from afar and only left when the latter's figure disappeared. She was very curious as to why her grandfather only allowed Nye Tian to enter. Could it be that he wanted to tell Nye Tian something secret? Nye Tian followed the path and soon reached the end. At the end of the path, what appeared in front of him was an elegant and unique little courtyard. Before entering the small courtyard, he could already smell the fresh and elegant fragrance of flowers. Little friend Nye Tian, come in. At this moment, in the courtyard, a calm voice rang out. It was very calm, but it could not hide its forcefulness. What a deep aura. Nye Tian frowned. He could sense an aura as vast as the ocean from the other party's voice. He took a deep breath and stepped in. The moment he entered the courtyard, he suddenly felt an extremely terrifying force appear. It was as if it was coming from all directions, making it impossible for him to dodge. He could only endure it. The tremendous pressure was like a giant boulder, causing Nye Tian's gaze to freeze and his expression to turn serious. He did not expect the pressure to be this terrifying. Following this, not only did the pressure not weaken, it grew stronger instead. Nye Tian's body sank slightly as his legs sank into the ground. His face turned red and purple, and his whole body was enduring an abnormally terrifying power. This energy was boundless and boundless. It was like a mountain that was slowly pressing him into the ground. This is the pressure of sword intent. In the next moment, Nye Tian sensed that the pressure around him was actually from a strand of sword intent. His pupils shrank involuntarily. He could not imagine that someone's sword intent could be this terrifying. Nye Tian, your strength is too weak. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed in you. At that instant, a calm voice could be heard. Following this, a white-shirt figure appeared before Nye Tian, who was stroking his white beard and staring at Nye Tian in a mocking manner. Nye Tian stared at the figure, and his eyes began to tremble violently. The figure's aura was boundless, like a boundless ocean, like the vast sky. Just by standing there, he gave off an invisible pressure. Nye Tian could feel that his opponent was like a vast ocean, while he was like a small ditch. The difference between them was like the difference between heaven and earth, causing him to be extremely shocked. However, he was not discouraged at all. Instead, he was extremely furious. Even if his opponent's strength was much stronger than his, there was no way he could be pressured like this. Isn't it just a sword intent? Break! Following this, he let out a roar and activated the celestial demon nascent embryo in his body. Bang! 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 Strands of celestial demon energy suddenly erupted and merged with the blood chi and sword intent in his body, forming the celestial demon sword intent. Bang! The moment the celestial demon sword intent gushed out, a terrifying sword aura erupted from Nye Tian's body and directly shattered the sword intent pressure around him. Nye Tian's figure moved and leaped out from the ground, standing in front of the white-shirt elder. Amazing! Looking at the furious Nye Tian, the white-robed old man let out a hearty laugh and said in a loud voice, "The person recommended by that guy is indeed extraordinary." Nye Tian frowned and looked at the white-shirt elder cold. He asked in a deep voice, "May I know who you are?" "Sacred Heavensward Alliance's Alliance Master, Jun Chujian." The white-shirt elder smiled faintly, with unconcealable joy on his face. The white-shirt elder was none other than the Sacred Heavensward Alliance's Alliance Master, Jun Ouching's grandfather, Jun Chujian. Nietion's eyes narrowed and couldn't help but tremble for a moment. He had already guessed that the person before him was the Sacred Heavensward Alliance's Alliance Master. However, he didn't understand why the other party would use sword intent to suppress him. Jun Chujian was very powerful. Nietion could clearly feel that this person's sword intent was stronger than Anya Minjia and the other two legends of the sword world. It was obvious that Jun Chujian's sword Dao cultivation was above the three legends. Is it strange? Jun Chujian saw through Nietion's doubts and smiled. I saved your life and let you break the sacred Heavensword seal. Of course, he wants to test your talent. Moreover, Ai's action didn't do you any harm. On the contrary, he gave you great benefits. Benefits? Nietion was stunned and didn't quite understand what Jun Chujian meant. I'll know after I feel your sword intent, Jun Chujian said with a smile. Nietion's eyes narrowed and immediately felt his own sword intent. His expression stiffened and he was petrified on the spot. After a full 10 seconds, he finally came back to his senses. His sword Dao realm had miraculously improved. From elementary sword martial fusion to intermediate sword martial fusion. The pressure of the sword intent just now had created a very good environment for Nietion's sword intent, which inexplicably allowed him to improve his realm. It had to be said that Jun Chujian's sword intent was indeed abnormally strong. Thank you, Alliance Master. Nietion came back to his senses and bowed slightly, sincerely expressing his gratitude. Jun Chujian didn't have any malicious intent towards him. Otherwise, there was no reason for Nietion to stand still. There's no need to thank Ai. It's your strong will that forcefully broke through Ai's pressure of sword intent. Otherwise, your sword Dao realm couldn't have improved at all. Jun Chujian smiled and sized up Nietion. Chapter 22:49. Alliance Master, is there a problem? Nietion noticed that Jun Chujian's expression had become very strange, so he couldn't help but frown and ask, "Little fella, you really aren't an ordinary swordsman." Jun Chujian laughed heartily with unconcealable admiration in his eyes. According to Ai's observation, there are several sword intents in your body at the same time. Each of these sword intents is top-notch, comparable to genius swordsmen of the same level. However, when you broke through Ai's sword intent pressure just now, you fused these sword intents together and formed a new sword intent. The power that can promote the fusion of sword intents is very terrifying. It's even stronger than those sword intents. Therefore, the sword intent produced from this is extremely powerful. It's a brand new sword intent that surpasses all other sword intents. Your sword intent, regardless of its level, is definitely the strongest sword intent in terms of sword intent aptitude alone. After that, Jun Chujian smiled happily and said, "That fella's eyesight is really good." It seems that he recommended a very good candidate to Ai. Nietion listened to Jun Chujian's words with a face full of doubt. This old man first talked about his sword intent, then praised him, and finally brought out another person. Just what was going on? Nietion, are you wondering why I would look for you? Jun Chujian seemed to have seen through the doubt in Nietion's eyes and asked with a faint smile. Nietion's eyes narrowed as he thought of something. Ever since he entered the Sacred Heavensword League, he had never taken the initiative to say his name. However, the 4 black-clothed swordsmen and the Sacred Heavensword League's Alliance Master all knew his name. Obviously, Jun Chujian already had a certain understanding of Nietion from another person. In the next moment, the appearance of the mysterious person appeared in Nietion's mind. His eyes slightly trembled as he said, "It's him." "Yes." Jun Chujian nodded and smiled. Of course, he knew who Nietion was talking about. He said, "I made a deal with him. I saved you, and you helped I break the Sacred Heavensword seal." Niet Tion's eyebrows furrowed as he finally understood what was going on. The reason why Jun Ouching went to save him was that the mysterious man was behind it. The mysterious man and Jun Shujian made a deal. Jun Shujian would save Niet Tion's life, and Niet Tion would help the Sacred Heaven Sword Union break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal. However, in Niet Tion's opinion, this deal seemed a little too simple. He vaguely felt that there might be a hidden deal behind the transaction. The mysterious person seemed to have long since known that he would encounter danger in the Thousand Devils Cave, so he arranged everything in advance. Lord Alliance Lord, you should know how powerful the force behind the person who wants to kill me is. Niet Tion became cold for a moment and said, I'm very curious. You haven't even seen me before, so why do you believe that I can break the Sacred Heaven Sword seal? Although Jun Shujian looked very peaceful and amiable like a grandpa next door, he was the Alliance Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. Since he was the Alliance Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union and controlled the 7 major sword sects, he must be an extremely shrewd person. He definitely knew how powerful the person who wanted to kill Niet Tion was. However, he didn't even see Niet Tion's face before agreeing to the deal and sending Jun Ouching to save Niet Tion. This way of doing things was a little too sloppy. He should be very clear that the matter of Niet Tion being rescued would definitely be found out, and it would definitely be traced back to him. For a person he had never seen before, he had to offend an unfathomably powerful opponent. This was clearly unwise. With Jun Shujian's shrewdness, he didn't seem like someone who would do such a thing. Niet Tion, it seems that you've thought about many things for you to ask this question. Jun Shujian smiled calmly and said, Actually, I was also hesitant to save you. However, the person behind you isn't an ordinary person. Since he values you so much, there must be a reason. Most importantly, I owed him a big favor in my early years, so I had no choice but to agree. Then, Jun Shujian nodded with a smile and said, Niet Tion, do you still have any doubts? Yes. Niet Tion's eyes flickered as he laughed and said bluntly, It seems to me that the deal between the two of you is too simple. So I feel that there's a hidden deal behind this deal, right? Hearing Niet Tion's words, Jun Shujian's expression obviously changed, but returned to normal in an instant. He smiled and said, Niet Tion, it seems that I underestimated you. You're smarter than I thought. Since you asked, I doesn't have to hide it from you. There's indeed another hidden deal between him and I, but it's not convenient to tell you what the hidden deal is. You don't have to worry. You'll know everything soon. Sure enough, Niet Tion's heart trembled. Although he had some guesses, he was still surprised when he confirmed it. He really wanted to know what kind of shocking deal there was between the mysterious man and Jun Shujian. Niet Tion didn't care. Anyway, he would know everything sooner or later. At this moment, he had a more important question in his mind. Lord Alliance Leader, I have a question, but I don't know if I should ask. After thinking for a while, Niet Tion's eyes flickered as he said, If you want to ask, just ask. There's no need to be afraid. Jun Shujian said with a smile. Niet Tion nodded. He took a deep breath and said, Lord Alliance Leader, to tell you the truth, I've only met that mysterious senior a few times. And I'm not from the land of the abandoned. I came from another domain. I'm very confused. Who is that mysterious senior? Why does he want to help me? After saying that, Niet Tion stared at Jun Shujian with burning eyes, looking forward to the latter's answer. In fact, this question had been bothering Niet Tion for a long time, but he hadn't found the right person to ask. Jun Shujian seemed to be very familiar with the mysterious man. That was why he thought of asking Jun Shujian. As expected, Niet Tion, you still asked this question after all. Jun Shujian looked at Niet Tion, but his eyes flickered. He couldn't help but shake his head and said, It seems that he really found the right person. What do you mean? Niet Tion saw that Jun Shujian's expression was very strange. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. However, in the next moment, he understood and his expression changed. The mysterious man knew that he would ask this question. Niet Tion, your wisdom far exceeds I's expectations. Jun Shujian regained his composure and said with a faint smile, You're right. He knew that you would ask me this question. and he already gave the answer to why. Do you want to know what he said? Chapter 2250. Tian didn't expect that his every move had been predicted by the mysterious man. Even the question was within the mysterious man's expectations. Even so, he still wanted to know what the mysterious man had said to Jun Chujian. Jun Chujian stared at Tian with glowing eyes. He then opened his palm, and a ball of light appeared. Tian looked at the ball of light, but he could only see the flowing light. Tian, this is the image he left for you. Only your divine sense can enter it. Jun Chujian smiled and handed the ball of light to Tian. Tian took the ball of light. He couldn't help but tremble. He then glanced at Jun Chujian. The latter nodded with a smile. He didn't hesitate anymore. He sent his divine sense into the ball of light. Where am I? In an instant, Tian's divine sense seemed to have entered a strange world. There was nothing but endless starlight around him. This is the original starry holy world. At this moment, a voice was heard. Then, a ball of light appeared in front of Tian. It was the mysterious man. The original starry holy world? Tian was stunned. The shock in his heart was written all over his face. He couldn't imagine that his divine sense had come to the legendary sacred world. Tian, don't be nervous. What you see is just an illusion of the starry holy world, the mysterious man said. The starry holy world no longer exists. This? Tian was stunned. He didn't know what to say. A sacred world no longer existed. To him, such a thing was too terrifying. Tian, it's too early to tell you this. The mysterious man smiled and continued. It's normal for you to have doubts about my identity. If you believe me directly, it means that you're a fool. I've warned you not to trust any stranger. To you, I am a stranger, am I not? As he spoke, the mysterious man looked at Tian. The corners of his mouth twitched, revealing a mysterious and strange smile. Senior, what are you trying to say? Tian became cold and asked with a frown. Tian, release the heaven-shrouding totem. The mysterious man smiled and said, Sky-shrouding totem. Tian was stunned for a moment, and his eyes suddenly trembled. He didn't expect the mysterious man to know about the shrouding sky totem. After pondering for a while, Tian did not hesitate. His figure shuddered slightly as streams of star force burst out from his body, together with the heaven-shrouding totem. Heaven-shrouding totem, my old friend. Long time no see. When the mysterious man saw the totem, his gaze suddenly became mysterious. He spoke in a clear voice, as if he was talking to an old friend he hadn't seen for a long time. Tian was stunned and puzzled. It seemed that the mysterious man was very familiar with the heaven-shrouding totem. Just at the next moment, a strange scene happened. The heaven-covering totem suddenly began to spin in the air. Totem after totem began to fold, quickly turning into a humanoid figure. This? Tian was stunned by the scene in front of him, and his expression was one of shock. He had never known that the heaven-shrouding totem could turn into a human figure. After the heaven-shrouding totem turned into a human figure, the star force became much stronger. The powerful totem's aura was even more powerful, giving people an indescribable shock. Following that, another shocking scene occurred. Master, the human figure formed by the heaven-shrouding totem came to the mysterious man's side, bowed slightly, and said. Tian was shocked by the scene in front of him. His eyes suddenly narrowed, and his whole body froze as if he was struck by lightning. It's been so many years. I didn't expect to see you again. The mysterious man smiled and took a step forward. The heaven-shrouding totem covered his whole body like clothes. Tian was petrified on the spot. After a dozen seconds, he finally reacted. Everything that happened in front of him was too shocking. He couldn't believe it all. The heaven-shrouding totem suddenly turned into a human figure and spoke, as if it had its own consciousness. If he didn't have a little rationality left, he would even think that he was in someone's illusion. Senior, what's going on? Forcing himself to calm down, Tian asked. Tian, if I tell you that the heaven-shrouding totem is actually my original spirit, will you believe it? The mysterious man smiled and looked at Tian calmly. The heaven-shrouding totem is your original spirit? Nietion's eyes widened in disbelief. He had always thought that the heaven-shrouding totem was born from the star raw stone. But now, the mysterious man said that the heaven-shrouding totem was his original spirit. How could Nietion believe it? Senior, you're not joking, right? Nietion sucked in a deep breath and asked woodenly. Do I look like I'm joking? The mysterious man smiled faintly and said, Nietion, I know that it's hard for you to believe everything in front of you, but I want to tell you, all of this is real. The heaven-shrouding totem is indeed my original spirit. Huff, huff, huff. Nietion exhaled 3 mouthfuls of foul air in succession and said, if the heaven-shrouding totem is an original spirit, why does it have its own consciousness? In theory, anything could become original spirit. Although the heaven-shrouding totem was a little weird, it was also acceptable. Nietion himself still had an original spirit, which was a coffin. But original spirits were all attached to martial artists and could not have their own consciousness. But just now, the human figure condensed by the heaven-shrouding totem spoke to the mysterious man. This undoubtedly showed that the heaven-shrouding totem was something with its own consciousness. Can't original spirits have their own consciousness? The mysterious man smiled and said, Nietion, don't you also have an original spirit with its own consciousness? Nietion's gaze trembled, and his brows furrowed into a ball. He did have an original spirit with its own consciousness, the 9th extreme chaos beast. He did not expect that the mysterious man even knew that the 9th extreme chaos beast had its own consciousness. Nietion instantly felt that he was transparent in front of the mysterious man, with no secrets to speak of. But he knew nothing about the mysterious man. If the heaven-shrouding totem is your original spirit, then why did it appear in my body? Taking another deep breath, Nietion asked in a low voice. Everything in front of him was beyond his imagination. He tried to find a breakthrough point to help him understand everything. Because I'm a star emissary. At this time, the mysterious man's gaze suddenly trembled, and a strange light surged in his eyes, burning and intense. Star emissary? Nietion was stunned. He had no idea what the mysterious man was talking about. And at this time, the mysterious man suddenly took a step forward and knelt on one knee in front of Nietion. Senior, what are you doing? Nietion was shocked. He did not expect the mysterious man to suddenly kneel. Chapter 22:51. Nietion stared blankly at the mysterious man. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say a word. Everything that was happening in front of him was too confusing, and he was completely confused. The mysterious man had said that the totem was his nascent spirit. Now he was kneeling in front of Nietion, calling himself a star emissary and calling Nietion the Star Lord. Just what was going on? Senior, are you sure you haven't mistaken me for someone else? Nietion stood rooted to the spot for a long time. Then, with a grim expression, he said, I have nothing to do with the star domain lord you mentioned. As he spoke, Nietion gestured for the mysterious man to stand up. Nietion, you are the one chosen by the primal star stone. The mysterious man stood up slowly, his expression returning to normal. You are not the Star Lord yet, but you will become one in the future. Primal star stone? Upon hearing these words, Nietion's pupils contracted slightly as he asked, Are you saying that because I have origin star stones in me, I'm the star god sex Saint Lord? Yes. The mysterious man nodded. The primal star stone is the cornerstone of the star Lord Holy World. The one chosen by it is the star Lord Holy World. Nietion was speechless. He suddenly remembered something. Senior, didn't you just say that the star Lord Holy World doesn't exist anymore? Then there shouldn't be a star Lord Holy World, right? The mysterious man's expression turned solemn when he heard Nietion's words. The star Lord Holy World doesn't exist anymore, but the primal star stone still exists. You are the one chosen by the cornerstone of the star Lord Holy World. You will inherit the will of the previous star Lord Holy World and rebuild it. Nietion's eyes lit up as he exclaimed, Rebuild the star saint realm? The The mysterious man's words were too big for him to accept. He was just a weakling who had just become a paramount god. The mysterious man was asking him to rebuild the Star-Lord Holy World. Was this a joke? Up until now, he still couldn't figure out what was going on in front of him. Nyetian, rebuilding the Starry Sky Holy Realm is your responsibility. You can't shirk it. The mysterious person looked at Nyetian with steely eyes and a solemn expression. Nyetian's eyes flickered. He felt that his mind was a little empty, and he couldn't think straight. He felt that he had inexplicably gained a sacred and great identity, the Star Saint Lord. Because of this identity, he had to rebuild a sacred world. Moreover, this matter was his responsibility, and he could not shirk it. This joke was a little too much, and Nyetian couldn't accept it. Nyetian, there are some things that cannot be avoided. At this moment, the mysterious man spoke again. It's just like how I can't escape my identity as the Starry Sky Messenger. I will stay by your side and protect you with my life. Nyetian let out a long sigh. What the mysterious man said was too big. He needed time to accept it slowly. But he already understood the gist of the story. A long time ago, there had been a Star-Lord Holy Realm, and the Starry Sky Primal Stone was its foundation. But for some unknown reason, the Star-Lord Holy Realm no longer existed, and the Starry Sky Primal Stone disappeared along with it. Then, due to a strange combination of factors, the Starry Sky Primal Stone chose Nyetian and became one with Nyetian. Because of this, Nyetian had become the Star Saint Lord and shouldered the responsibility of rebuilding the Star-Lord Holy Realm. Actually, Nyetian wasn't running away from anything. He just felt that rebuilding a sacred world was too far away for him. He was only an early-stage paramount god, and he couldn't even see the threshold of becoming a saint. Given his strength, how could he rebuild a sacred world? Don't worry, Nyetian. The mysterious man seemed to have guessed what Nyetian was thinking. Your mission now is to live well. As long as you live, there is hope to rebuild the Star-Lord Holy Realm. We've waited for millions of years. Of course we'll keep waiting. Nyetian nodded slightly. Since things had come to this, he had no choice but to accept it. Suddenly, something occurred to him. He looked at the mysterious man and asked, Senior, if, and I say if, I die, does that mean there's no hope to rebuild the Star-Lord Holy Realm? Do you want to hear the truth? The mysterious man asked with a laugh. Of course. Nyetian nodded, his eyes burning. No. The mysterious man's eyes narrowed. If you die, the Starry Sky Primal Stone will continue to exist, and it will continue to search for the next suitable person to be the Star Saint Lord. The Starry Sky Primal Stone will accompany the chosen person as they grow, until that person becomes the true Star Saint Lord. Nyetian's face darkened when he heard the mysterious man's words. So he wasn't that special or important. The Starry Sky Primal Stone was the most important thing in rebuilding the Star-Lord Holy Realm. As long as the Starry Sky Primal Stone existed, it would continue to search for the next Star Saint Lord. Nyetian suddenly felt like he had been used by the Starry Sky Primal Stone. Nyetian, do you know how long the Star-Lord Holy Realm has been destroyed? The mysterious man suddenly looked at Nyetian and asked with a strange look in his eyes. I don't know. Nyetian shook his head. Almost 5 million years, the mysterious man said with a nod. That's a long time, Nyetian exclaimed. He hadn't expected that. The mysterious man smiled strangely and asked, Do you know how many Star Saint Lords the Starry Sky Primal Stone has chosen over the past 5 million years? I don't know. Nyetian shook his head again. 1. The mysterious man stared at Nyetian with a serious look. You are the only one chosen by the Starry Sky Primal Stone in the past 5 million years. Nyetian went blank for a moment before his eyes flickered. The only one. He had thought that the Starry Sky Primal Stone would have chosen many Star Saint Lords. Unfortunately, those who had been chosen had all died. That was why it was his turn now. But now it seemed that he was quite special. After all, he was the only one chosen by the Starry Sky Primal Stone in the past 5 million years. Nyetian, you should know how important you are now. The mysterious man nodded and said, If you die, I'm afraid we'll have to wait another 5 million years. Now that you mention it, I'm quite special. Niet Tian laughed. He couldn't help but feel proud. Sir, did you? The next moment, something occurred to Niet Tian, and he asked in surprise, You've lived for 5 million years? The mysterious man had just said that if Niet Tian died, he would have to wait another 5 million years. Didn't that mean the mysterious man had already waited for 5 million years? Could a normal martial artist live for 5 million years? As far as Niet Tian knew, martial artists at the peak of the supreme god realm could live for 5 to 600,000 years. More talented martial artists could live for 2 to 300,000 years, but not more than 1 million years. He couldn't believe that the mysterious man had lived for 5 million years. Chapter 2252. Niet Tian was stunned to hear the mysterious man admit that he had lived for more than 5 million years. What he had seen today was far beyond his knowledge. It was a huge shock to him and at the same time broadened his knowledge of the world. Star Emissary. Niet Tian suddenly realized something and looked at the mysterious man with a passionate gaze. Sir, you called yourself the first star emissary. Does that mean there are other star emissaries? When a mysterious man knelt before Niet Tian, he called himself the first star emissary. It was an interesting title. It seemed that other than the mysterious man, there were other star emissaries. Also, the mysterious man used the word we several times when he spoke. This meant that he had other companions. The mysterious man looked at Niet Tian and nodded. There are 9 star emissaries in total. Our responsibility is to protect the Star Saint and assist him in rebuilding the Star Saint territory. Oh, Niet Tian nodded with a smile and asked, What about the other star emissaries? Where are they? How strong are they compared to you? Niet Tian was overjoyed that there were 9 star emissaries. Judging from the mysterious man's strength, the other 8 were not weak either. If all 9 of them worked together, their combat power would be unimaginably terrifying. I don't know. Unexpectedly, the mysterious man shook his head and said solemnly, When the Star Saint territory collapsed, the 9 star emissaries were lost. I don't know where the others are. Maybe they're still alive, maybe they're dead. Dead? Niet Tian was taken aback. Even star emissaries can die. Of course. The mysterious man smiled at Niet Tian's question. Star emissaries are not immortal. Of course they can die. Niet Tian smiled bitterly. It seemed that he had overthought it. It was not surprising. If even the Star Saint leader could die, then the star emissaries could. Niet Tian was curious. If the other 8 star emissaries were not dead, where would they be now? How strong would they be? Niet Tian, don't think too much. The mysterious man chuckled. The land of the abandoned is still too dangerous for you. When the 3-month deadline is over, you should return to your original territory. What about you? Will you go back with me? Niet Tian's eyes flickered with a hint of desire. If the mysterious man followed him back to the 9 territories, there would be no way to deal with him. The mysterious man shook his head. I must stay in the land of the abandoned. There are many things that I need to do. Star Emissary, I have to deal with them. If I interfere, I will make you stronger. Niet Tian nodded. Of course he understood what the mysterious man meant. No matter how beautiful they were, they would be of the land of the emissaries. No matter how beautiful the flowers in the greenhouse were, they were destined to be unable to withstand the blows of the storm. Niet Tian didn't want to be a flower. He wanted to be a towering tree, fearless of any storm. We will meet again soon. The mysterious man felt the determination in Niet Tian's eyes, smiled, and disappeared. We'll meet again soon. Sensing the determination in Niet Tian's eyes, the mysterious man smiled faintly and disappeared. Niet Tian, are you okay? Jun Chu Jian could not help but ask when he saw the look of shock on Niet Tian's face. Niet Tian, are you all right? Jun Chu Jian couldn't help but ask when he saw Niet Tian's shocked expression. Niet Tian, are you okay? Jun Chu Jian could not help but ask when he saw Niet Tian's shocked expression. I'm fine. Niet Tian smiled faintly, and his expression returned to normal. He was a man with a sense of propriety. Since the mysterious man didn't want him to know, he must have told Niet Tian something confidential. Since the mysterious man did not want him to know, he must have told Niet Tian some secrets. Yet Tion's mood had stabilized at this time, and his whole person was calm again. He had a vague guess in his heart, but he did not have time to ask the mysterious man. There were 9 star messengers in the primal starstone, and there were 9 galaxies in the galaxy realm. Each level of the 9 galaxies would give birth to something different. The totem in the first galaxy was the primordial spirit of the first star messenger. Was this a coincidence? Did this mean that the other 8 galaxies had an unusual relationship with the other 8 star messengers? Thinking of this, Tion could not help shaking his head. He could not figure out why the primordial spirit of the mysterious man would appear in the galaxy realm. Origin starstones indeed contained too many mysteries, waiting for Tion to unravel them one by one. Alliance Master, tell me about the sacred heaven sword seal. What kind of sword seal is it? Tion asked with a faint smile as he recalled the sacred heaven sword seal. He already knew that there was another secret deal between the mysterious man and Jun Chujian. But right now, he still had to pay attention to the sacred heaven sword seal. Since Jun Aoqing had saved him, he naturally had to find a way to break the sacred heaven sword seal. Tion, come with me. Jun Chujian smiled faintly. Then his figure moved, and a powerful aura directly shrouded Tion. Of course, Tion did not resist and followed Jun Chujian straight up to the sky. The two figures moved quickly, and a moment later, they arrived in the sky filled with mist. Tion could vaguely see a towering mountain peak in the air in front of him, like a giant that could prop up heaven and earth. Jun Chujian smiled faintly and then waved his hand. A majestic sword intent was released like a gust of wind, dispersing all the mist within a radius of tens of thousands of meters. Tion gazed off into the distance and saw with great clarity a towering mountain peak piercing through the clouds like an enormous sword that had been stabbed into the ground. The sacred heaven sword seal is on Mount Xingtian. Jun Chujian's eyes narrowed as he pointed at the mountain in front of him. Tion nodded slightly and took a step forward, getting closer to Mount Xingtian. At this moment, he could clearly feel that the surrounding space was filled with a vast and boundless sword intent. This sword intent was so terrifying that it made Tion feel like breathing was being suppressed. At this moment, he was at least 10,000 meters away from Mount Xingtian. What a strong sword intent aura! Tion could not help but exclaim. His eyes were fixed on the highest point of Mount Xingtian. He saw a sword intent seal suspended above the peak, releasing a majestic sword intent to suppress the surroundings. Without a doubt, the sword intent seal, suspended in the air, was the legendary sacred heaven sword seal. Tion carefully sensed the sword intent aura in the sacred heaven sword seal, and his expression constantly changed. He had never seen such a powerful sword intent aura before. In the sword seal, there seemed to be a wild beast condensed from sword intent. It was extremely terrifying and could devour anyone who came close. The terror of the sacred heaven sword seal exceeded Tion's expectations. Chapter 2253. Tion, the sword intent seal floating in the air, is the sacred heaven sword seal. Jun Chujian came to Tion's side and stared at the sacred heaven sword seal. Tion slightly nodded in shock. He felt that the sword intent in the sacred heaven sword seal was somewhat different from the other sword intents. Not only was the sword intent in the sacred heaven sword seal powerful, but also contained a very mysterious aura. This aura was something that Tion had never felt before in any other sword intent. It felt like the aura in the sacred heaven sword seal was a super sword intent that transcended all other sword intents. Tion was very puzzled. The sacred heaven sword seal was very unusual. It seemed that it wouldn't be easy to break this sword seal. Tion, what do you feel? Jun Chujian looked at Tion and asked in a deep voice. Tion explained what he felt in his heart and finally said, "Why is the sword intent in the sacred heaven sword seal different from other sword intents? It's so strange." Rumor has it that the sacred heaven sword seal was left behind by a mysterious swordsman a long time ago, the sacred heaven ancestor. Jun Chujian bitterly smiled and said, No one knows what level of swordsman the Sacred Heaven ancestor was at. No one can say how terrifying his sword intent is. The Sacred Heaven Sword Union has been established for nearly 1,000,000 years and has produced countless sword Tao geniuses. But no one has been able to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. This sword seal is like a huge mountain pressing on the Sacred Heaven Sword Union, making it hard for the past Union Masters to breathe. At this point, Jun Chujian couldn't help but sigh and said, "I've been a Union Master of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union for 200,000 years. For the past 200,000 years, I've been dreaming about how to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. But it's a pity that there are so many swordsmen in the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. No matter how talented you are, you can't do anything to the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal." With that, Jun Chujian couldn't help but sigh again. Nie Tian frowned and suddenly looked at Jun Chujian and asked, "Union Master, I want to know what's sealed beneath the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal." "Sword Tomb." Jun Chujian didn't hide it and said, "The Sacred Heaven Sword Seal is actually a gate that leads to the Sacred Heaven Sword Tomb. The Heaven Sword Tomb is a sword Tao tomb left behind by the Saint Era in the Forsaken Land. Rumor has it that there are countless sage-level swordsmen's inheritances in the Sacred Heaven Sword Tomb. It is said that there are countless sword Tao inheritances left by the Heaven Sword Clan." As he spoke, Jun Chujian's eyes were filled with unconcealable passion. It was obvious that he desired the saint's sword mound very much. The corner of Nie Tian's lips rose as he finally understood. No wonder Jun Chujian wanted to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal so much. It turned out that it was for the sword Tao inheritance in the Sacred Heaven Sword Tomb. The sword Tao inheritance of the Heaven Sword was a fatal temptation to any swordsman. As long as one could integrate the sword Tao inheritance of the Heaven Sword, it was possible to become a saint with the sword Tao in the future. But no matter how great Jun Chujian's desire was, everything was just a dream before the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was broken. Nie Tian glanced at Jun Chujian and thought, breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal is definitely a great thing for the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. The mysterious person must have given a great condition to Jun Chujian. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Jun Chujian break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. The benefits of breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal were self-evident for the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. The mysterious person was clearly not someone who was easy to deal with. He must have given a great condition for such a great benefit. Nie Tian now understood why Jun Chujian was willing to risk offending a great enemy to save him. Because breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was too important for the Sacred Heaven Sword Union. Nie Tian, let's leave first. At this moment, Jun Chujian nodded and prepared to leave. Nie Tian nodded in agreement, and the two of them left. Breaking the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was a very important matter, and they obviously couldn't do it directly. Moreover, Nie Tian knew that if he tried it directly, he wouldn't be confident of success and would be in great danger. The sword intent contained in the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal was too powerful, and it could easily backfire on Nie Tian. Very soon, Nie Tian and Jun Chujian returned to the Qingxin little courtyard. Alliance Lord, the sect master of the Rakshasa sect, is here. He's waiting in the heavenly hall. Just when the two of them landed, a voice came from outside the courtyard. He's here so quickly. Jun Chujian had already expected this and smiled. Tell him that I will be here soon. Yes, the person outside the courtyard replied before his aura disappeared. Alliance Lord, since you have something to take care of, I won't disturb you any further. Just arrange a place for me to stay, Nie Tian said with a smile. Nie Tian, the sect master is here for you. How can you not go? Jun Chujian shook his head with a smile. Nie Tian went blank for a moment, confused. You're after me? You're invited by I to break the Sacred Heaven Sword Seal. The sect masters of the Sacred Heaven Sword Light Alliance obviously want to see you. Jun Chujian smiled. Come with me to meet them. Nie Tian frowned helplessly and could only follow Jun Chujian. Until now, he still didn't know what the 7 major sword sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance were. He only knew that the Rakshasa sword sect and the Ling Yun sword sect were the two strongest sects among the 7 major sword sections. The sword sect that Jun Aoqing was in should be the Sacred Heaven Sword sect. The Sacred Heaven Sword sect was the authentic one among the 7 major sword sects, and the Alliance Lord of the Sacred Heaven Sword Alliance, Jun Chujian, was a swordsman of the Sacred Heaven Sword sect. Previously, Nie Tian had already met Luo Sanfeng of the Rakshasa Sword sect and Ling Hanfeng of the Lingyun Sword sect. Judging from their attitude towards Jun Aoqing, the relationship between the 7 major sword sects of the Sacred Heaven Sword Union wasn't harmonious. The conflict between the various sword sects should be very deep. Nie Tian followed behind Jun Chujian and couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Vaguely, he felt that something would happen next. A moment later, Jun Chujian and Nie Tian arrived outside the Sacred Heaven Hall. Alliance Lord, long time no see. Before the two of them entered the hall, a powerful voice came out from the hall. It was filled with an extremely violent aura, and it resounded in the space like a clap of thunder. Sect Master Luo. Jun Chujian smiled, and his voice turned into a gentle force in the air, easily dispelling the violent aura in the air. In the next moment, a burly figure in black flew out from the hall and landed heavily in front of Nie Tian and Jun Chujian. Nie Tian looked at this person and couldn't help but be shocked. This person's aura was very powerful, and an extremely violent sword intense surged around him. It circulated in the air, making him look ferocious and violent. What was more frightening was that the sword aura around this person was extremely terrifying, not inferior to the 3 legends. This figure in black was none other than the sect master of the Rakshasa sword sect, Roten,